Okay, I think we'd like to get started now because we have a very full program. And if we could start, okay. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Center for African Studies. And we are going to have a welcoming from Dean James Michelli, who's Vice Executive Dean of School of Arts and Sciences.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning and to introduce you. I want to welcome you all to Rutgers, particularly our international visitors. I think this is great that you were able to navigate the immigration system in this trying time, and so we're really grateful for the effort you put into coming here for this conference. I'm very proud of the Center for African Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences. Regional studies and area studies programs have had some difficulties over the last couple of decades in higher education, and the ones that are really excelling, like our Center for African Studies, are a real beacon of hope that this is an area that people will continue to cultivate and value as we go forward. Our Center for African Studies is a wonderful interdisciplinary organization that brings together scholars who work in about a dozen different departments on campus, and it does amazing work, including things like organizing this conference that brings so many of us together. So I'm really grateful for the work that the Center put into organizing this conference. When I looked at the program, I was reflecting on what would I say in an introduction to a program like this, and then it really occurred to me that the real symmetry between the subject that we're studying, Timbuktu, and this event itself is really one of the major things that deserves some mention. The idea that the city itself was a major crossroads, and that this conference is, in a similar way, is a crossroads. It's a crossroads, I would say, in several different ways. It's a crossroads in terms of intellectual and academic interests that are being brought together in this event. So we have specialists in the field of religion, in theology and philosophy, in history, in archaeology, in literary approaches, coming together to study a subject, and I think this is amazing. It's in some ways a testament to the kind of work that went on in Timbuktu itself. The other thing that I think is really amazing here is the international component. And again, at the crossroads of Timbuktu, which brought together people from all over the globe in an international trading center, we have scholars at this gathering. By my understanding, at least from looking at the program, we have scholars who have come from Mali and South Africa and Canada, as well as from a large number of U.S. states. So the idea that this is a gathering place and a place to exchange ideas and international perspectives. And then the third thing that I thought was really an amazing kind of distillation of what Timbuktu was in history and what we're trying to accomplish here is bringing together this global framework and this global perspective with a very local dimension, a very local approach to looking at this problem. And in particular, what impresses me is the opportunity that we'll have over the next couple of days to think globally about some really major issues, but also then to see some of the manifestations, some of the way that these global trends and influences and ideas were put into effect in our local situation here in the state of New Jersey. So we used to have a slogan at Rutgers, local roots and global reach. And I think this is in some ways one of the best illustrations of that slogan that I've seen in recent past. So I'm really looking forward to a great couple of days. I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope that this event is as good as we all hope it will be. So thank you for coming.
I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how we came to develop this project. It came from actually a discussion that Paul and I had about 2 years ago, or a little bit more than that, in which I think at that point Paul mentioned that there's this Timbuktu in Jamaica, which he's going to talk about. And then I said, there is one in New Jersey, and then we found this one in upstate New York. And so we thought about this as one of the few real opportunities where African American history and African history really do intersect. And it's not like people were making up connections. We have a situation in which we have a very important anti-slavery, two very important anti-slavery settlements that were both of whom took a name from a center of culture and knowledge that's in West Africa and that connects West Africa with the rest of the world. So we started, digging around, and we found that there were people in these two locations, New York and New Jersey, who are already working on these projects about these communities. And so in the South Jersey area, the mayor of West Hampton had put together a committee of people who were working on the Timbuktu in West Hampton. And we found out that Timbuktu was related to the Underground Railroad, which you'll see in the back of your this booklet. There's a picture of the New Jersey Underground Railroad, and you can see Timbuktu is one of the stopping off points on that railroad. And I just also wanted to say these maps are from our wonderful cartography lab here at Rutgers with Mike Siegel, who is the most amazing map drawer. So he did all of the maps that are in this book. And we called him and we said, Mike, we need so-and-so, and he'll dig it up, and then you keep working with him. So these are actually, the Underground Railroad maps are from the Schomburg Center's In Motion digital collection, which he did all of the maps for that, and he did the ones for India, Africa and India also. So you can see from this map all of the route that the Underground Railroad took. Part of the crossroads is actually New Brunswick, and we just had a big project here about Rutgers and the involvement of Rutgers in the slave trade, which is so we're doing the kind of examination that many of the universities are doing. The 2 pages here have the map of Timbuktu in New Jersey in terms of this incredible concentration of black settlements in New Jersey. There are 23 of them. And some of them were antebellum. Some of them were actually, they still exist. Some of them were incorporated. So that Timbuktu is just one of many. And so you can see from this map the names of them all. We're going to try to actually work on many of the others as well. So what we decided to do is we said, wouldn't it be great to bring some scholars from Mali? Because people that, when we went, Bruce Hall and I went to an event that Guy Weston, who's one of the people from the Timbuktu area, every year they have a commemoration of Timbuktu on Memorial Day in West Hampton. And we went to the event last spring, and there were over 200 people showed up for that event. And so we said, now it would be great to bring together the children who are in school in that area with children in Mali, and also to bring teachers. And we actually did bring, yes, Mrs. Facio, okay? Yes. Could you stand up? She's the teacher who was born in Timbuktu, and she's visited the schools in Jersey. Yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up, I guess you'd say, electronic pen pals, because the kids in Jersey and in New York State are going to talk to kids in Mali. So that was one of the other sort of offshoots of the project. Martha Swan, who I'd like to have stand up as well, she runs the John Brown Lives, which is an amazing project that you're going to see the exhibit, which is at the New Jersey Seminary. And that's something that they pulled together, and they've done a lot of public history work. So this attempt right here is just to start what we think will be a longer process. We did have a teacher's workshop in June, in which we had 23 New Jersey teachers. And it coincided with the Mandela Fellows who were visiting Rutgers, and one of them was from Timbuktu, and she came and spoke about women's education in Timbuktu. So one of the things we would like to do is to continue these connections and probably set up a sister cities kind of relationship between, like, a triangle, with South Jersey, New York State, and Timbuktu, Mali. So thank you very much for coming to this event. And Paul he's also going to welcome you as well.
If I can just elaborate a little bit on when Carolyn and I started talking about this, it was really, at the time, quite a crazy idea. I knew about Timbuktu, New York, and had for some time, although I still to this day have not actually been to the site, although I certainly know where I've been through Saranac Lake many times and so on. But I did not know about Timbuktu, New Jersey. Carolyn was extremely surprised to hear that there was a place called Timbuktu, Jamaica, which I will show you in a minute. But our idea really, we wanted to play on the magic of the name, because it's a term that's common in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, so many different languages, representing some place that's very distant, very far, either with negative or positive implications or no implications, but it's used in that way. And we wanted to build on that public perception so that we could talk about a number of issues that were very important. One of the issues, of course, at the time when we started talking about this were issues of Islamic extremism and the occupation of Timbuktu. And one of the things that we were concerned about was sort of very strong anti-Muslim and ignorance that prevails. We wanted, obviously, to emphasize the importance of Timbuktu, Mali, as a religious, scholarly, commercial center going back very far. But we also wanted to tie it with the fact that Timbuktu, New Jersey, and Timbuktu, New York, are associated with issues of resistance to slavery, and so that we wanted to connect a bunch of these things together. Now, the way our conversation went was that I explained to Carolyn that there was a Timbuktu, Jamaica, which I had come across in research that I was doing doing a biography on a man, Muhammad Kaba Saganugu, who came from a Buka in what's now Guinea, West Africa, on the border of Fouta Djallon, which was one of the states founded in jihad in the 18th century. And he was kidnapped on his way to Timbuktu, as a matter of fact, where he was going to study law. And he ended up in 1777 on a coffee estate in Jamaica called Spice Grove, where he lived until he died, a free man, in 1845. He lived a very long life. He wrote a couple of texts which we published that in Arabic, having in about 1820, after he'd been away from West Africa for some 40 years and had not had access to any Arabic text or any text of any sort, so he wrote completely from memory what in fact are two books about praying: when you pray, why you pray, what happens if you don't pray, how do you pray at a funeral, how do you pray at a wedding, and so on. And and he was an amazing man. Lived at this coffee estate, Spice Grove, which is located in Manchester Parish, and is on the escarpment overlooking St. Elizabeth Parish. And one of his sons was actually executed for complicity in the 1831-32 Christmas uprising in Jamaica, so that it's an interesting story in itself. But he came to my attention, actually, through an excerpt of some letters that he wrote in Arabic that were translated and published, actually 50 years ago this year in Philip Curtin's very important book, Africa Remembered. So I was involved in doing research on this, and it turned out that there was a reference in his account to the owner of an estate that was called Timbuktu. And so that was a pure coincidence that there was such a place. Moreover, in his text in Arabic, or in one of his letters actually, that he wrote to other Muslims in Jamaica, because there was a Muslim community in Jamaica in the 1810s, 1820s, and 1830s. And I actually think that at the time when he wrote his two Arabic texts, he was the head of a Muslim community in Manchester that could have numbered as many as 1,000 people. It's completely escaped any attention of any historians, completely. And how do I know this? Well, they all ended up joining the Moravian Church because they had to hide their Islam. They really couldn't operate and practice openly. But he was a leader of enormous importance. His descendants, two of his descendants actually, had subsequently became cabinet ministers in different Jamaican governments in recent years under their English name, which is Peart. And so he was called Peart. But when he wrote to his fellow Muslims, he says, "You call me by the name the Jews call me." And I said, "What Jews?" And then I started looking around in the maps, and here was one plantation that was owned by the Cohen family. And here was another one, and the Timbuktu plantation was owned by somebody who was Jewish. And so this all became very interesting in this way. And so I brought this, but I want to show you Timbuktu. It was a coffee estate just outside of Mandeville. I was there last summer. It was the first time I'd been there. And you'll see why we're not going to hold a conference. Do I just press the first? Thanks. How do I get on? Wait a minute. There. Where? All right. All right. So this is Timbuktu, Jamaica today. There is nothing there. Absolutely beautiful country. Wonderful country. I counted along the road 4 very small houses, not nucleated in any way. There's no sign. There is nothing. How do I know it was Timbuktu? Well, first of all, when I was doing my research, I actually found a number of contemporary maps. There are a lot of wonderful maps in Jamaica of different estates and so on. There was no map of Timbuktu itself, the coffee estate Timbuktu, but there were maps where they showed the boundary, and the next one over was Timbuktu, and it's on the map. So I had lots of reasons to know that this place actually existed. And this young lady operates the only business establishment in what's now Timbuktu. She comes from Timbuktu. She was born there and verified the place was called Timbuktu. She sells Red Stripe beer. And that's about all she does. It's a typical Jamaican roadside little place that dot the back roads of Jamaica everywhere. The only other customers that were in there were 3 Rasta guys who were smoking away with cigars of considerable size. And they don't sell ganja here because it's free. But they do sell Red Stripe. And she was very, I stayed there for about an hour and a half, had a couple of Red Stripes, and talked about Timbuktu and about the possibility of a Timbuktu society in Jamaica, which she thought was a great idea. She'd been trying to convince her neighbors for years that the importance of where they lived, and she agreed when I nominated her to become president of the Timbuktu local. She agreed immediately, and we hope one day that actually we will have a follow-up conference. We can't have it here because there's nothing here except unless you want a red stripe. But in nearby Mandeville, there are wonderful conference facilities, and maybe someday we will have a follow-up conference in Jamaica which emphasizes the importance of this name in this context too. So that's all I have to show you about Timbuktu. You see there are wires, so there is electricity, and this is actually a field, so that there is more than just trees. But other than that, there's nothing left of this heritage of this place that I have no idea why it was called that. I have no idea anything about the reasons, but it certainly existed by the 1820s. I know that from maps that I've copied from the archives there. So that's how this all came about. And so now we're going to learn about more substantial Timbuktus. The final Timbuktu that was not represented here is the California gold mining town that was named Timbuktu, which is completely deserted. So no one lives there at all, so that we don't even have any, and we don't have representation there yet. But we're looking forward to hearing a lot more about the other Timbuktus. Thank you.
I forgot to add one piece, which is that we do want to have a conference in Mali, and that's the next object, and we'd like to take people from here to Mali, as we brought a delegation from Mali here. So that's the goal, and if we have the luck we did this time, which is 100% success, that's what'll happen. Okay, so we can begin the first part, which is a dialogue with Sheikh Mahmou and Bruce Hall. And if you look in your booklet, it explains Sheikh Mahmou is one of the Timbuktu trained scholars. He is a very famous scholar with a considerable following, and he does calligraphy, and he trains scholars in Timbuktu. So he's one of the real authentic scholars of the city of Timbuktu. So we are very grateful that he's come to visit us. We go now.
Can everybody hear me? So my name is Bruce Hall. I teach history at Duke University in North Carolina, and I've been involved in this process of organizing this conference over the last couple of years, so it's been a great pleasure to work with everybody here. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we were inviting people from Mali to talk about Timbuktu was to get real scholars, the most serious people we could. And there really isn't anybody, I think, who fits that bill better than Sheikh Mahmou. When I first went to Timbuktu in 1999 as a graduate student, I met him, and he was clearly, by that point, he was not working at the research center where most of the manuscripts were held, but he had done more or less, a very large percentage of the work of identifying and cataloging those manuscripts there. And the reason you knew that, and the reason I came to know that, is because his handwriting is in the registers where the manuscripts, when they were first recorded and given numbers and identified, essentially. I've come to know since then his handwriting very well, and he's a really, really central figure to the entire constitution of this archive on the one hand. And his education in Timbuktu was, we might think of it as representative to some extent of a traditional education, a traditional Islamic education, insofar as that could happen in the middle of the 20th century. He also, of course, has a more different kind of education that allowed him to work as a teacher and eventually as an inspector of education in Timbuktu, and he's just retired from his final position in 2014. But I think his passion has been for these manuscripts and for the intellectual tradition that can be found in them. And there really isn't anybody who's even close to having done the kind of work on this material. And I have a couple of things. I don't want to take too much time because obviously you're more interested in hearing from him than me. But I mean, he's written a number of very, very important works, a number of which have been published, some in Arabic, which is the language that they were originally written in. Some have been translated and published in other places. These are very substantial 300-400 page books, which really get into important details of the intellectual tradition that can be found inside these manuscripts. And so everybody who goes to Timbuktu, whether they are Malian or whether they are from outside, who's interested in this material, would search out Hamu, Sheikh Hamu. And in his house, he has a very wonderful kind of room where he would often receive people and give lessons both to local people and to visitors. I think all of many of our colleagues here have some experience with that. I have here even an attestation, a sort of document written by the late John Hunwick, probably the most important Western scholar of Timbuktu's Arabic intellectual tradition, attesting in an unbelievably accurate but also complimentary prose about the extent to which Sheikh Hamu is an absolute par excellence, no exception, top person in all these different aspects of knowledge and expertise about the manuscripts. He also is an expert of calligraphy, so he has all kinds of skills that aren't just about the content but also the production. His handwriting is, as anybody who's ever seen it, wonderful and really, really, really fabulous. So we have a really unusual opportunity. This is his first trip ever to North America, and what we're going to try to do today is have a kind of conversation. He's going to speak in French. I'm going to do my best to convey some idea of what he says in English. We're going to try to make it a little bit conversational, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So it's not going to be a traditional talk, keynote address in that sense. It's going to be more dialogical, and so you should feel free, I think, to get involved. But please join me in welcoming Sheikh Hamu.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dans le cadre des activités que vous organisez ici, j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter la ville de Tombouctou comme une perle intarissable. Parce que quelqu'un avait écrit dans un livre que Timbuktu, Jawharatun ta'muruha ar-rimal, est une perle qui a été ensevelie par les sables. Et moi, je trouve que Timbuktu est une perle intarissable. Timbuktu, c'est une ville millénaire, cosmopolite, fondée depuis le 5e siècle de l'Égypte. C'est un lieu de savoir, pays de peuples venus de tous les coins connus dans les grands pays. Avec des grands voyageurs, lieu de rencontre des savants, avec son rayonnement culturel et intellectuel, sa tradition écrite et orale sous les phares et la clairvoyance permanente de ses érudits et de ses savants.
Yeah, so we'll have to work out exactly how this is going to work. But so he's introducing Timbuktu as somebody wrote that it's a pearl that is sort of encased in the sand, and Timbuktu is a town founded in the 5th century of the Muslim era. It's a city of knowledge, a city with people who have come there from everywhere, a city of travelers, a city of knowledge, both written and oral, a city which has a great deal of cosmopolitan value. As you see, this will be a free-floating translation. Yeah.
Timbuktu, avec son histoire abondante, sa culture d'élite, et ses élèves et étudiants zélés, avertis, et son rayonnement géographique de la langue arabe et les sciences islamiques a donné une chance à Timbuktu d'être vraiment une ville vraiment épanouie, favorable à cause de l'implication des souverains. Sa place géographique a reconnu un grand rayonnement. C'est-à-dire que Timbuktu était une ville qui était sous la clairvoyance des oulémas, des grands savants, et en même temps aussi les rois de l'époque aussi veillent sur le développement de la culture et de la science islamique à Timbuktu.
So Timbuktu was a center that functioned because of where it was located, both as its reputation developed on the basis of the scholarship that took place in that city and the reputation of its scholars, Islamic scholars. But this was also something which you think of perhaps more secular political authorities used and relied upon. So there's a kind of balance between religious and secular authority there that helped to make Timbuktu the place that it was, the important place that it was.
Tout cela grâce à son rôle joué au XVIe siècle dans la culture islamique. Les appréciations de l'auteur de Tariq al-Soudan et les témoignages des multiples écrivains à travers les rapports de voyage, comme Ibn Battuta, dégagent la voile sur les réalités de cette ville et surtout à cause de son université qui était l'une des plus favorisantes du monde. Comme exemple, nous avons Félix Dubois qui compare l'université de Sankoré au quartier latin en Paris. Il disait aussi qu'elle était la sœur cadette de l'université de Caire, de Cordoue, de Fès, de Damas. C'est-à-dire que Timbuktu était une ville extraordinaire dans le domaine de la culture. Avec les témoignages des grands chercheurs comme Ibn Battuta, l'auteur de Tariq al-Soudan, ils ont beaucoup écrit sur l'histoire de Timbuktu pour montrer vraiment la valeur culturelle et intellectuelle de cette ville.
So Timbuktu's moment of perhaps greatest importance was around the 16th century, and we know from texts such as the 17th century Timbuktu Chronicle, the Tariq al-Sudan, as well as from travelers' reports such as the travels of the Moroccan Ibn Battuta, who visited Timbuktu in the 14th century, that there was a really vivid intellectual culture that formed around the University of Sankore. And at the time, Sankore was a center of very high Islamic intellectual culture, and at the level of, or even surpassing, similar universities in Cairo, in Fez, in Damascus, and in Cordoba.
Donc, comme Ibn Battuta aussi, il y a Léon l'Africain qui a parlé de Timbuktu. Il a parlé vraiment de la culture de Timbuktu, de l'intelligentsia qui se trouve à Timbuktu. Il a parlé de tout ça. Donc, il y a beaucoup de voyageurs aussi qui ont voyagé, qui ont passé par Timbuktu, qui ont écrit leurs témoignages de ce qu'ils ont vu à Timbuktu. Et ils étaient tous impressionnés par l'abondance de la culture et la connaissance est dans tous les domaines.
So there were other travelers in addition to Ibn Battuta. Leo Africanus is one of them, a Moroccan who ended up living in Italy, and in any case wrote an account of his travels to Timbuktu. and other travelers. And all of these travelers bore witness to the fact that there was a very high level of culture, of intellectual culture, in all kinds of areas.
L'histoire a souligné qu'à l'époque de l'université de Sankoré, il y avait plus de 25 000 étudiants. Et à côté, plus de 180 écoles coraniques avec plusieurs étapes d'enseignement.
So the high point we have, it reported that there were 25,000 students at Sankore University and 125 schools, sort of lower level schools operating in Timbuktu at that time.
Les savants venaient de tous les côtés pour apprendre et pour aussi s'inspirer quand même des réalités de la ville. C'est ainsi qu'il y a des savants qui ont quitté à l'extérieur pour venir enseigner à Timbuktu, mais finalement ils se sont transformés en élèves parce qu'ils ont trouvé des érudits qui étaient plus forts qu'eux à l'époque.
So the way that this worked was that people from all over the sub-region would go to Timbuktu after a certain level of education to seek out scholars who had a higher level of sophistication in a particular topic. And so those students who would go to Timbuktu would then themselves become teachers. And this is the way that Timbuktu functioned as a sort of center and as a teaching center and an intellectual center for the whole region.
Donc pour cela, il faut comprendre que Timbuktu est devenu un coin attrayant pour tous ceux qui veulent apprendre et tous ceux qui veulent échanger aussi. C'est pour cela qu'on dit que cela a rendu la ville de Timbuktu comme un espace de la connaissance et du savoir, et voir même une source d'inspiration du donner et du recevoir. Parce qu'il y avait l'échange à Timbuktu, sur tous les plans, sur le plan commercial, culturel, social, etc.
So Timbuktu became a site at which all kinds of exchange took place. It became a center for this kind of exchange, scholarly, academic exchanges, but also commercial exchanges. And the two, there is a very integrated relationship between the academic production and exchange and the fact that Timbuktu was a commercial center. Those two things went together.
Les témoignages de tout ça, c'est à travers les manuscrits. Timbuktu est une ville qui est gorgée de beaucoup de manuscrits qui traitent de plusieurs sujets, c'est-à-dire de toutes sortes de sujets qu'on peut trouver dans les manuscrits. Et quand on dit qu'il y a un manuscrit dans une ville, ça veut dire qu'il y a toute une gamme d'activités autour de ce manuscrit. Parce qu'il ne peut pas avoir un manuscrit sans ne pas avoir de copistes. Il ne peut pas avoir de copistes sans ne pas avoir aussi des techniciens qui maîtrisent les techniques de la calligraphie. Il ne peut pas avoir tout ça aussi, il faut aussi des techniciens pour maîtriser aussi l'encre. Il faut avoir aussi des grands savants qui sont là pour écrire, pour mettre leurs pensées sur papier. Donc vous voyez que quand on voit les manuscrits dans un endroit, ça veut dire qu'il y a toute une sorte d'amalgame, d'intelligentsia autour de ce manuscrit.
So Timbuktu became a center where Arabic manuscripts were produced, copied, and written, of course. And Timbuktu became a real center of manuscript production. We need to understand that a manuscript is not produced alone. It is instead at the center of a whole complex of different skilled people and different kinds of knowledge. People were needed for copying. People were needed for production of the material things that needed to go into the making of writing, ink, paper production, bindings, people who were teachers, all kinds of levels of people. So this is a much more complex site of production than one might imagine from simply thinking about a manuscript or a scholar.
Timbuktu est une ville qui se réclame de tous et tous aussi se réclament de Timbuktu. C'est-à-dire tout le monde dit que je suis de Timbuktu. Mais Timbuktu aussi, il dit que lui aussi, il est de tout le monde. Parce que les savants qui étaient à Timbuktu étaient des savants qui réunissaient toutes les couches de la société. Donc, ainsi, à travers les étudiants, tout le monde peut se dire que je suis de Timbuktu, et Timbuktu aussi dira qu'il est de tout, il est de tous.
So, Timbuktu became for these reasons, it became a very famous place. Everybody would claim to belong to Timbuktu. But because of the process of what Sheikh Ham has been talking about, of people coming to Timbuktu for more advanced studies, and the fact that that was open to people of all different social positions, in some ways it's true that Timbuktu, people in Timbuktu could say Timbuktu is everybody. It's not a narrowly endogamous. This is me, not a narrowly endogamous place, but instead some place where the people in Timbuktu could claim people outside it as much as people outside it could claim Timbuktu.
Les relations entre Timbuktu et les autres villes sont de plusieurs ordres. Il y a les relations islamiques, les relations culturelles, il y a artistiques, sociales, amicales, économiques, littéraires, soufistes et familiales. Et c'est comme ça aussi que, comme vient d'évoquer tout de suite notre collègue ici tout de suite, nous avons vu une lettre d'un certain Abu Bakr Siddiq à Timbuktu al-Jannawi, qui est de Timbuktu et de Djenné, qui s'est retrouvé en Jamaïque. Dans cette lettre-là, il a parlé quand même de sa vie à Timbuktu et comment les choses se passent. Donc tout cela, ça montre que à Timbuktu, les racines sont encore profondes et en réalité aussi, c'est des choses que, avec les recherches, on peut aboutir encore à beaucoup d'informations.
So, the relations that Timbuktu has with that extend from it include relations about Islam, economic relations, artistic relations, all kinds of different ways in which this site was connected outside of itself. And Sheikh Hamu cites the example of Abu Bakr Siddiq. Abu Bakr Siddiq, a man who was enslaved, and a man who had an education between Timbuktu and Jenne, who was then enslaved, much like Paul Lovejoy was talking about, found himself in Jamaica, and was able in letters written in Jamaica, in Arabic, to communicate something of his history and his relationship to Timbuktu from Jamaica. So we have the extent, the range, the reach, I guess, of Timbuktu all the way to the New World, as we were hearing earlier.
La chose la plus importante, c'est l'éducation à Timbuktu. L'éducation à Timbuktu est une éducation qui réunit beaucoup de facteurs. C'est-à-dire qu'un enfant grandi à Timbuktu, étudie à Timbuktu, devient un enfant bien éduqué. Un enfant instruit, bien éduqué, et qui a aussi la chance aussi de connaître. C'est-à-dire que le travail est lié aussi à l'éducation, à l'enseignement. L'enfant bénéficie de l'enseignement, de l'éducation et de la formation aussi artisanale.
So, education at Timbuktu was a sort of integrated type of education. A child who was born in Timbuktu would be expected to both learn the proper comportment of a Muslim, of a person who was possessor of this kind of knowledge, who would also learn skills that would be connected to the kind of work that that child would do as he became older.
Et si on prend aussi le plan racial, à Timbuktu, vous avez toutes les races, c'est-à-dire toutes les races se retrouvent à Timbuktu. Donc les gens sont liés les uns aux autres. C'est pour cela que vous aurez un professeur, un grand érudit, quand il délivre un diplôme à un de ses élèves, ce diplôme aussi est un point fort pour renforcer ces liens entre celui qui a délivré le diplôme et celui qui a reçu aussi le diplôme. Donc, il y a tous des facteurs qui sont créés pour renforcer les liens familiales, les liens amicaux à travers les différentes composantes de la société timbuktienne.
So, all different peoples and ethnic groups, races, were brought together in Timbuktu by the process of Islamic education. Students who studied under a particular teacher would be given, upon the successful completion of their studies, they would be given a diploma, which would indicate that they had successfully completed whatever it was that they were studying. These diplomas acted as a way of binding together and strengthening connections that existed between families and between people of different ethnic or racial groups. So Islamic education functioned in a way that tied together different kinds of people.
Dans le domaine de l'évolution même de la culture à Tombouctou, ça je vous parle quand même sous le contrôle de beaucoup de chercheurs qui sont là. Vraiment nous, que nous avons les mêmes mises dans les manuscrits, nous sommes vraiment étonnés de voir à l'époque, à leur temps, leur niveau de connaissance, si on arrive vraiment à les comparer vraiment à la connaissance d'aujourd'hui. Ils sont vraiment des hommes qui sont vraiment doués. Ils maîtrisent la langue arabe et ils ne sont pas des arabes. Ils maîtrisent mieux la langue arabe. Et d'ailleurs, j'ai même vu que Ibn Khaldoun a dit que les Noirs ont joué un rôle très très important dans le développement même de l'islam et même de la langue arabe. Parce qu'on pense que la langue arabe, c'est surtout les Arabes seulement. Or, en réalité, les Noirs maîtrisent la langue arabe plus que les Arabes. Et en même temps aussi, même la lecture du Coran, les différentes formes de lecture du Coran, c'est les Noirs et ce n'est pas les Arabes. Donc c'est pour vous dire que dans le temps, à l'époque, l'enseignement était vraiment très très dense. Et nous avons retrouvé aussi dans les manuscrits quelque chose d'extraordinaire, un livre de grammaire traduit en littérature, un livre de grammaire traduit en poème panégyrique du prophète, un livre de grammaire traduit en théologie, c'est-à-dire que le livre, la matière de laquelle le livre parle, on le commente dans une autre matière qui est différente de la matière dans laquelle le livre est conçu. C'est pour montrer vraiment, c'est-à-dire que l'élan que ces érudits avaient à l'époque.
So one of the things that people who have worked on these manuscripts from Timbuktu will recognize is that the level of sophistication of the scholarship that was produced in Timbuktu in the past was remarkable, and that many of the scholars who wrote works that we now have were incredibly gifted. And he cites Ibn Khaldun, the famous North African historian, as saying that the blacks played a very important role in the development of Islam and even in the development of the Arabic language. Black scholars played an important role, despite the fact that Arabic was usually not their first language. Developed forms of, became very sophisticated scholars in disciplines like recitation of the Quran, and that we can see in some of these manuscripts the absolute mastery of the fields, different fields of the Islamic sciences and of the Arabic language, in their dexterity and the ways in which they bring different branches of Islamic knowledge into juxtaposition with each
other. Nous avons eu la chance quand même de retrouver tout juste dans les années 81, je peux dire que la dernière vague quand même des grands savants que nous avons retrouvés à Tombouctou. Je vous dis que ça coïncidait avec l'arrivée de l'imam de la Mecque à Tombouctou. Lorsqu'il est venu, nous avons un de nos professeurs, un professeur de littérature, qui a fait un poème dédié à l'occasion de l'arrivée de l'imam. Alors l'imam lui a dit qu'il y a un grand poète dans le Golfe. Ce grand poète avait dit que la langue arabe est une langue qui ne sortira jamais de sa zone. Et il disait que si cet homme-là vivait, il allait lui dire qu'il a retrouvé à Tombouctou quelqu'un qui maîtrise cette langue plus que lui. Ça, c'est un exemple que j'ai vécu moi-même. Et le deuxième exemple, c'est un Soudanais. qui travaillait sur le livre d'Abdoulaye Danfodio sur la conjugaison. Ce Nigérian, il est venu, on s'est rencontrés, je l'ai amené chez mon professeur de grammaire. Ils ont discuté ensemble, il m'a juré que même si Sibawahi vivait, ça veut dire Sibawahi c'est le plus grand grammairien du monde. S'il vivait, il allait dire que j'ai quelqu'un quand même qui connaît la grammaire comme moi à Tombouctou. C'est pour vous dire que ça c'est la dernière vague. Ne parlons pas de ceux qui sont avant. C'est pour vous donner seulement un petit aperçu sur l'importance de la culture, comment c'était vraiment dominé à Tombouctou.
So, if we want to think about maybe the last wave of great scholarship at Timbuktu, and this is in a period when Sheikh Hamou was actually there to witness it in the 1990s. This was a period when, if I remember this correctly, that the Imam of
L'imam de la Mecque.
L'imam de, excuse me, so I've inverted it. So the Imam of the mosque, the Grand Mosque in Mecca, came to Timbuktu and essentially realized the level of sophistication of Arabic amongst scholars in Timbuktu. And talking about another scholar from Sudan who was an expert working on grammar and no, not grammar. Le Soudanais, c'était qui?
L'étudiant qui travaille sur un ouvrage de Abdoulaye Danfodio sur la conjugaison.
So a student who was working on works of Abdullahi Danfodio, a grammatical work, one of the leaders and intellectuals of the Sokoto Caliphate in northern Nigeria in the early 19th century, basically bearing witness to the fact that the level of sophistication of the high scholarship in Timbuktu was unparalleled.
C'est pour vous dire que vraiment, à Tombouctou, si on prend l'histoire culturelle, ça ne finit jamais, c'est tellement vague, c'est tellement profond que c'est pas facile à dire dans quelques minutes. Je ne peux pas vraiment abuser de votre temps. Je vais essayer seulement de m'arrêter ici, parce que si on continue, on ne va jamais finir, parce que j'ai pensé que j'allais prendre seulement un échantillon comme Chassidi El Mokhtar, pour vous parler seulement de ses œuvres et ce qu'il a fait, un petit exemple, mais le temps ne le permet pas, je ne vais pas vous abuser de votre temps.
So instead of going on at greater length and in greater detail, we're going to move into more of a discussion. I think what I'll do is we have until 10:30, is that right? 10:25?
Et je vous remercie tous de votre aimable attention.
Until 12. Oh, so we have lots of time. Okay. 11:25. Oui, on a 30 minutes. On va commencer de discuter un peu. Et vous, I'll ask a couple of questions maybe, and then we'll open it up for the audience. If you don't mind, I'll just sort of start this. What I'd like to know is, est-ce que tu peux discuter un peu ta vie personnelle, ton éducation personnelle? Comment tu as été formé à Timbuktu par Ahmed Boularaf, par de tout cela, juste pour donner une idée de l'expérience et
Bon, vous savez qu'en réalité à Timbuktu.
So the question is if he could talk about his personal education, his personal experience in Islamic education in Timbuktu, sort of give us an idea of how this played out through his own experience.
Vous savez qu'à Timbuktu, à partir de 6 ans, on vous envoie à l'école coranique. Donc de là-bas, il faut vraiment essayer quand même de mémoriser le Coran au moins dans 2 ans ou 3 ans. Mais après, il y a l'école française aussi. Vous allez fréquenter aussi l'école française. Donc l'enfant, le matin de bonne heure, il va à l'école coranique. À partir de 7 heures maintenant, il descend à l'école française. Donc il fait la routine entre ces deux-là. Donc nous, on a vécu ce système-là. Et les jours de fériés, les samedis, les dimanches, tu vas à l'atelier pour apprendre. Il faut être dans un atelier. Donc tu agrandis avec l'école française, le Coran et aussi les métiers.
So the way that he experienced this, at about 6 years old, children would be sent to a Quranic school. And the goal of the Quranic school was for those children to memorize the Quran. And ideally, this would be something which would take place in 2 or 3 years. A successful student would be able to memorize the Quran. But they also attended the public schools, which were French schools, the state schools. And so they did both. They did the two systems, if you like, at the same time. So they attended the French school, and when one was done, they would go to the other. And this is a system that you still see in a place like Timbuktu. And then a third level or element of education was that on the weekends, they would go and they would learn a skill, a trade, something which would enable them to earn a living at some future point. So you have these three kinds of education that Sheikh Hamo experienced.
Donc nous avons eu la chance de tomber sur un professeur qui est très exigeant. Lui, il nous exigeait de venir à 3 heures du matin à l'école coranique pour essayer d'aller à l'école rapidement à 7 heures. Et là, quand on va la nuit, on est obligé de mémoriser. On récite, on ne lit pas dans les ardoises, on récite par cœur, et lui, il nous écoute. Maintenant, après la prière du matin, nous prenons nos ardoises pour réciter ce qui est sur l'ardoise. Et quand tu laves l'ardoise, immédiatement, vous allez à l'école. À midi, quand vous descendez, vous retournez encore à l'école coranique pour recopier la partie du lendemain. Donc, c'est comme ça qu'on a vécu dans cette pression un peu. Mais c'était vraiment, il y avait l'ambiance, parce que toute notre génération, on était dans la même chose. Donc, c'était vraiment l'ambiance. Donc, on ne sentait pas quand même l'effet de cette pression-là.
So, this was he says they had the good fortune to be put in the hands of a professor or a teacher who taught them. But this was nonetheless a very difficult, a hard way of learning. They would be given a passage of text which they would have to memorize, and then they would go off to the French school, and then they would have to be able to recite this, and then there would be after the school, I guess, another passage which they would be given. They'd have to memorize the night. They'd have to recite this correctly before prayers in the morning. The French school started at 7 o'clock, so this was a very tough regime of education. But because everybody did it, it brought a kind of camaraderie, I suppose, and didn't seem so difficult at that time.
Alors, avec l'intensité quand même de ces études-là, finalement, on a abandonné l'école française parce qu'on ne veut plus que nos autres camarades quand même soient devant nous. Donc, on a abandonné l'école française pour rester dans le cadre de mes collègues. Parce que je ne veux pas que mes collègues aussi soient devant moi. Donc, j'ai préféré laisser l'école et j'ai continué. Et étant déjà à l'école aussi, une de mes professeurs, j'étudiais chez son père. Les après-midi, je prends le sac du professeur, je l'amène à l'école. Donc à partir de 14 heures, je prends les cours chez le père de notre professeur. Et en même temps aussi, je prends le sac de mon professeur, je l'amène à l'école. Donc je faisais la routine, mais j'avais vraiment l'envie. Parce que chacun ne veut vraiment rester par derrière, à travers ses camarades. Chacun veut aller en avant. Donc il y avait la concurrence de l'étude qui était là. Et les professeurs étaient nombreux dans la ville. Dans tous les coins, nous avons des professeurs.
So part of this is, I think, he's describing a sort of social dimension to his education and the relations with his friends, and also sort of competition between students for how much they could learn and how much they could know. And so he and some of his other friends, he left the French school at a certain point and would then seek out study with particular professors, and there was a spirit of intensity and competition in wanting to do well with this, precisely because the other kids were doing well. They didn't want to be left behind.
Bon, on avait eu la chance quand même avec beaucoup de professeurs, chacun dans le domaine qu'il maîtrise. Donc, soit on est avec le grammairien Mohamed Abdullah Boularaf, soit avec le littéraire Abdelrahman Sidi aussi, c'est leur voisine de Nana Hawaii, Nana Hawaii, l'enseignante qui connaît son père, c'est mon professeur de littérature, de philologie. Alors, je prenais même le sac de Nanahaoui pour l'amener à l'école, à l'époque. C'est ça. Donc, il y a aussi, en littérature aussi, il y a Mohamed Ben Saddeq. Il y avait tellement de professeurs. Il y avait vraiment des professeurs à Timbuktu. Il y avait vraiment des grands érudits. Et les lieux de hadith, les lieux de lecture étaient intenses. Il y avait vraiment, là où on va, je vous imaginez, quand le matin je vais chez mon professeur, je prends mon cours là-bas. Avant de regagner chez moi, chaque regroupement que je passe, soit je vois quelqu'un qui est en train d'étudier ce que j'ai lu ce matin, ou bien quelqu'un qui est en train d'étudier ce que je devais lire demain, ou bien quelqu'un qui est en train d'étudier ce que j'ai lu hier. Donc, c'est comme même en cours de route, je révise mes leçons. Donc, l'enseignement était vraiment très dense à l'époque. Donc, c'est une chance que nous avons eue. C'est une chance vraiment que nous avons eue. Et des professeurs sérieux, des professeurs vraiment qui sont vraiment doués.
So there were many people who were very sophisticated scholars who could act as, and did act as teachers. And so the idea, the way this worked is that Sheikh Hamu and others would go to certain people to learn from them the thing that they were expert in or most expert in. And so we have, this is me jumping in here, we have a kind of version of the old system that we know sort of from the classical period when people just go to, they find experts and study under them individually. So Muhammad bin Ahmed study grammar with him.
Spécialiste en grammaire conjugaison.
So the
grammaire, conjugaison, succession, et en médecine aussi, c'est un spécialiste.
So I think we can just say grammar, but also medicine. Abdurrahman Sidi, literature, philology. Muhammad bin Sadiq, another person, I don't know. C'était quoi? Okay, so there's many people here who are, who he studied with, and one of the things that he said is that when he would go to his lesson in the morning, and then he would be coming back home, he would see other groups of students that would be studying and with some other master, and maybe that was somebody that he had studied with in the past, or maybe that was somebody that he had. So he would sort of be able to kind of revise or hear updates or remind himself of the lessons that he had already learned, and I presume also be enticed by things maybe that he hadn't yet learned. And so there was a sort of organic system here of all different kinds of teachers and different kinds of students that were, but they were all known to each other. And so there was a way in which they could pass from one to the other, to the other, to the other.
Et aussi, il y a la chose la plus importante, c'est la mémorisation même des textes. Ça compte beaucoup. Parce qu'un élève, tu n'es pas considéré quand tu ne mémorises pas les textes qui t'utilisent chez le professeur. Là, parce que moi, le matin de bonne heure, après la prière du matin, immédiatement, on lit chez le professeur la leçon du jour. Mais dans l'obscurité, ça veut dire que tu as mémorisé la leçon. C'est comme ça. Et quand tu lis la leçon devant le professeur, il t'envoie aussi dans les commentaires pour essayer de lire les commentaires et de venir lui faire les comptes rendus de ce que tu as lu dans les commentaires. Donc, tout ça, ça facilite beaucoup la tâche. Mais le problème que nous avons confronté à l'époque, c'est qu'il n'y avait pas assez de documents. C'est-à-dire que tu trouves que nous étudions par exemple un livre de grammaire aujourd'hui, peut-être celui qui a le commentaire se trouve dans un quartier qui est loin, et l'autre aussi a un commentaire dans un quartier qui est loin. Alors on est obligé d'aller voir chez lui, celui-là, qu'est-ce qu'il a dit, aller voir. Donc les livres étaient un peu, c'était pas à notre portée à l'époque. C'est pour ça qu'on a fini par être des calligraphes, parce qu'on est obligé de recopier. Donc finalement, on est devenu même des calligraphes, parce qu'on recopie même des manuscrits, parce qu'on est obligé de faire ça, parce qu'il n'y avait pas de livres à l'époque.
Well, the basic skill here was memorization, right? So the text would be memorized. That was the basic form of education, that what one had to do. And memorization of the text, keeping it in your head, was the fundamental skill, the most valued skill. But so we have a system of texts and commentaries, and texts and didactic versions of them, and versifications of texts so that they're more easily memorized. Anyway, so there's a whole system of text like this. So one would then be sort of tested on one's how well one had memorized certain things, and then one would learn certain kinds of commentaries, which would also could also be memorized possibly. The problem at the time was that there weren't enough documents. So there weren't enough texts available to be studied. So he had to go far to one end of town to study one commentary of a particular text, and then he had to go to the other end of town to study another commentary of this text. And he says one of the reasons that he became such a skilled copyist is that they needed to make their own copies of these commentaries so that they had a greater abundance and more accessible set of texts. They weren't all available next door. They had to actually exert quite an effort to get access to them.
Alors, on remercie Dieu quand même avec toutes les étapes affranchies, depuis les petites étapes jusqu'au Alhamdulillah, Dieu merci, on a eu quand même le grand diplôme qu'on appelle l'Ijaza. Alhamdulillah, on a l'Ijaza général, on a l'Ijaza spécial. Dieu merci, aujourd'hui, c'est grâce à ce que notre courage. Dieu merci.
So, thank God over this process. One gets more and more sophisticated. One develops a greater, through all these different steps, one becomes more and more specialist in certain kinds of things and receives these ijaza as a kind of diploma that attests to somebody's having mastered a certain body of knowledge or a certain text. And so one moves up to having a mastery of these things and this whole tradition. So that's the process that he went through, and he thanks God for having allowed that to have happened and for him to reach that stage.
Aujourd'hui aussi, on prend la relève, on enseigne, on a des élèves qui viennent, des étudiants qui viennent, qui apprennent comme nous avons fait aussi à l'époque, mais les moments ne sont pas la même chose parce qu'on ne peut pas mettre la pression. Alors souvent, on est obligé de se mettre quand même à l'abri de l'élève, c'est-à-dire que ce n'est pas comme notre temps. Notre temps, c'est le maître qui met la pression. Maintenant, nous sommes obligés vraiment de se soumettre pour que l'élève vraiment, pour qu'il puisse vraiment étudier à l'aise. On ne veut pas aussi qu'il tombe dans les difficultés dans lesquelles nous sommes tombés. Donc, on les facilite la tâche aussi. Donc, matin et soir, la porte est ouverte quand même pour la formation de ces élèves.
So today, this process continues. Sheikh Hamu is now one of the experts who's doing the teaching. And today it continues, but one of the differences between today and in the old days was that today they don't put pressure on the students. I think that's a euphemism for corporal punishment for mistakes, which I think is well attested in the past. But so now students are able to learn with less fear and more at ease. But the process continues, and it is, I think, the obligation or felt obligation of someone who has achieved Sheikh Hamu's level of knowledge to pass that on to others. And so he says that his door is open day and night, and I can attest to myself to having seen people, younger children studying. So it's absolutely something which does continue. Maybe we can. Yeah, maybe we can open up to. So please, I have. Yeah. Okay.
Bonjour. Je m'appelle Jocelyn White. I want to welcome you to the United States and thank you for enlightening us regarding the significance of Timbuktu. My question is, how did Mansa Musa, who was a king during the 14th century, did he contribute to the University of Sankore in Timbuktu? And also my second question is, in regards to women, how were they educated during that time period and also today? Were they availed the same opportunities as the men as far as receiving the education?
Soyez bienvenue aux États-Unis. C'est Jacqueline Smith. White, excuse, sorry. Elle pose des questions. Comment le rôle de Mansa Musa dans l'établissement de Sankore, l'université de Sankore. Deuxième question, l'éducation des filles. Qu'est-ce que c'était le système d'éducation des filles à l'époque de Merci. Et l'éducation des filles aujourd'hui à Timbuktu, est-ce qu'ils ont trouvé une position dans ce système d'éducation que tu as décrit?
Concernant Mansa Moussa, on peut vous dire que c'est l'homme qui a beaucoup contribué dans le développement même de l'islam et de la culture islamique à Timbuktu. Actuellement même, il y a un programme qui se passe à Timbuktu chaque année, c'est un programme de Mansa Moussa. Parce que Mansa Moussa, il mettait tous les moyens nécessaires pour les érudits. C'est pour cela que les grands savants quittent ailleurs pour venir à Timbuktu, parce que le roi de l'époque, il paye bien les professeurs. Il les met dans les conditions. Donc, d'autres professeurs viennent pour enseigner, pour avoir de l'argent. Donc, vraiment, il a mis le paquet, Mansa Moussa, avec Mansa Suleiman. Ils ont fait beaucoup de choses. Ils ont tracé même des programmes de l'île de Coran, de programmes de... Et d'ailleurs, le jour que le roi du Maroc est décédé, Mohamed El Hassan, il a organisé un grand festival, c'est-à-dire festa pour la lecture du Coran, avec des bénédictions quand même pour renforcer les relations entre Timbuktu et le Maroc. Donc c'était numéro 1, en tout cas quand même, dans les relations culturelles entre Timbuktu et surtout entre Timbuktu et le Maroc.
L'éducation des filles.
Maintenant, la question des filles. L'éducation des filles à Timbuktu, c'est une éducation correcte. Parce que ce qu'il faut comprendre à Timbuktu, la fille est la chose la plus importante. Et je vais même vous dire une petite histoire pour vous montrer la valeur de la fille. C'est des choses qui ne se passent pas maintenant. C'est dommage. Dans notre enfance, il y a des jours où la petite fille, on l'apprend comment encadrer une femme mariée. Donc, dans le quartier, on dit qu'on prend comment on appelle, une poupée. Et cette poupée-là, on dit que c'est cette poupée-là qui va se marier dans le quartier aujourd'hui. Et toutes les petites filles du quartier se réunissent. Ils font la même chose comme les grands. Comment on tresse la femme mariée, comment on met les parures, hein, les invitations. Les parents des filles donnent, d'autres donnent même des moutons pour égorger, pour rendre vraiment la fête la plus belle. Donc, la fille était tellement encadrée, était tellement choyée, était vraiment dans toutes les conditions à l'époque. Donc, nous, souvent, on est étonnés quand on dit que les femmes n'ont pas de droit. On est étonnés, chez nous, les femmes sont vraiment dans toutes les conditions. Et il y a même un écrivain qui disait qu'il est étonné de la manière dont les femmes sont vraiment traitées à Timbuktu. Donc, une femme, si on prend par exemple le côté mariage, si on voit le processus qui se passe dans le mariage, c'est extraordinaire. C'est une histoire à part. On ne va pas finir aujourd'hui. Si on prend par exemple aussi le côté de la formation en gastronomie, comment la femme est formée en gastronomie, comment elle est encadrée en gastronomie, ça aussi c'est un processus à part. Une femme timbuktienne, elle est capable de te faire toutes sortes de cuisine. Parce qu'elle a eu la formation. Elle est formée pour ça. Elle est formée pour élever un enfant. Elle est formée pour s'occuper des malades. Quand un enfant est malade, comment il faut le faire? Tout ça, c'est des formations qu'on donne, des formations de base qu'on donne à la fille. Donc, c'est pour vous dire que, et la fille aussi participe dans toutes les activités. S'il y a les jours où on doit travailler les mosquées, par exemple, les filles aussi sortent, ils prennent de l'eau. Ils amènent l'eau pour les maçons. Donc, les filles participent dans toutes les activités. Et il y a aussi des moments dans l'année qu'on les appelle, par exemple, en soirée, on les appelle, par exemple, les Koussou-Sassara, par exemple. Les femmes aussi, il y a des nuits, par exemple, où les femmes, les camarades d'âge se réunissent pour essayer de faire des activités, donc sous la clairvoyance des parents. Mais ils sont toujours sous la clairvoyance de leurs parents. Parce que l'éducation, à l'époque, à Timbuktu, était une éducation mutuelle. Ton enfant, c'est mon enfant. Donc, je surveille ton enfant comme tu surveilles mon enfant. Donc, c'était comme ça l'éducation. Mais aujourd'hui, ce qui se passe, c'est vraiment extraordinaire parce qu'il y a eu d'autres cultures qui ont intégré notre culture, qui ont vraiment, on peut dire qu'ils deviennent vraiment des virus quand même. On n'arrive plus vraiment à maîtriser la situation comme on veut. Sinon, il y a des filles qui récitent le Coran, qui connaissent le Coran, qui écrivent, tout ça, ça existait à Timbuktu. Donc, les femmes participent partout.
So first of all, Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa contributed a lot to the development of Sankore. Today in Timbuktu, every year, there's a kind of celebration that's named after him. One of the things that he did that was most important was he paid scholars well in order to do their scholarly work. He paid scholars well to come to Timbuktu. So in a sense, he was a patron of scholarship, and that is probably his most important role in the development of the Islamic educational complex associated with Sankore. Mansa Suleiman, another Empire of Mali king, ruler, he also did a lot of things. And he also mentioned that the King of Morocco, Mohammed Hassan, recently had must have been a Ramadan evening where there was a recitation of the Quran, in which was organized essentially around celebrating the ties between Mali and Morocco, which go very far back, and which Morocco has continued to seek to valorize. On the question of girls' education, so the Sheikh Hamu says that in the past, girls were essentially protected and educated in a way which was meant to teach them what they, first of all, needed to know as people who would be married, people who would end up in preparation for marriage. And he said that even the little girls in the neighborhood would all participate in sort of learning all of the different steps that would go into the preparation for marriage. He says that he or we are surprised when people say that women didn't have rights or didn't have rights in those days, because he thinks that they were well positioned and very well treated, that they learned and had skills that were, while different from men, important and complementary, and these included the extraordinary and famous across Mali anyway, cooking skills of the Timbuktu cuisine, learning how to raise children, learning how to treat sickness, and they also participated in a variety of affairs, including helping with building, bringing water to masons, for example, and other sorts of things. And so there was a kind of symbiosis, I think, is what he's trying to argue, between boys and girls education and the wider role of the whole community in helping to organize and supervise essentially children in the things that they were learning. Today, things have changed, and in Timbuktu there is an influence of a different culture, not a culture which is indigenous to Timbuktu, and he's critical of that to some extent. Today, girls are participating in these different domains, all of these different domains, including these domains of Islamic education. So girls are studying the Quran, girls are studying some of these Islamic sciences, and so that's the situation today.
J'ai voulu dire un petit mot parce que l'éducation de la femme à Timbuktu, parce que les Timbuktiens trouvent que la femme, c'est elle qui est capable de réunir la famille. C'est-à-dire que quand une famille est bien soudée, c'est à cause de la femme. Quand vous voyez une famille bien soudée, les frères, les sœurs, les cousins, ils se rapprochent. C'est parce que la femme qui s'occupe d'eux, vraiment, elle est bien éduquée. Donc, surtout l'éducation de la femme, sa connaissance et la source, c'est-à-dire la place même qu'elle occupe dans la société, parce que c'est elle qui est chargée de guider, vraiment de mettre la paix dans la famille, la sensibilité, c'est-à-dire vraiment l'amour au sein de la famille. C'est elle. Donc, elle est préparée à telle sorte que tout revient à elle. Et tout le monde reconnaît cela. Quand c'est qu'elle veut, c'est ce qui va. C'est qu'elle a proposé, c'est ce qu'on décide, c'est ce qu'on met en évidence. Parce que c'est elle qui connaît les enfants, c'est elle qui connaît les sœurs, c'est elle qui connaît les cousins. Donc c'est elle qui réunit tout ça. Et comme je vous ai dit, l'éducation était une éducation mutuelle. Donc tous les enfants, du cousin, tout le monde va, vous allez chez la femme. Donc la femme est préparée pour ça. Elle est préparée pour guider plusieurs catégories de personnes. Donc c'est pour cela qu'elle a une formation spéciale et tout le monde éveille sur elle.
So I will quickly explain this, and then you just wanted to add that the women plays a central role in the family and in the functioning of the family, and the proper functioning of the family depends upon the role of the woman, and that her education is essentially directed at this essential role in the society. What I propose, and you tell me if this is not okay, so I'm under your authority, but what I propose is that maybe we collect some questions, and if we don't have time to answer them, at least we kind of get the questions out there, and then I can communicate them, and maybe they can be discussed in private. Is that possible? Or
On peut avancer un peu.
minutes ago. Well, we'll never get out of here if I'm in charge.
On peut.
That's what I thought.
On peut donner un exemple de.
Non, on discute des questions. On n'a plus de temps. Okay, so I think why don't we leave the questions for the lunch and for the coffee, and please join me in thanking Sheikh Hamu for this discussion.
Thank you.
So it's my honor to be able to chair this panel called Timbuktu, Behind the Myths. And we have, as I said in introducing Sheikh Hamu, we also have three wonderful scholars who work on the manuscript materials and who are, I think, among the top people in the world who work on this material. Each of them quite accomplished. Perhaps the newer generation, not so young maybe, but well, I'd like to consider myself part of this generation, but they might not accept me as part of their group. Anyway, it's an excellent group of three people. We really are lucky to have such excellent people here giving us an idea of what they do. So the first person is Dr. Mohammed Jagieti, who is a senior researcher at the, I always call the main state archive in Timbuktu the Centre Ahmed Baba, or the CEDRAB, because that's what it used to be called, but it is now called the Institute for the, do we even have it here? The Institute of High Studies for Islamic Research. That's a terrible translation, but it's essentially it's an institute for advanced research in Islamic studies, and it's named after Ahmed Baba in Timbuktu. Dr. Jagieti has a PhD from the University of Zaytuna in Tunis, in Tunisia, where he did a dissertation in Islamic studies, Islamic civilization, on the Malian Fulani contribution to Islamic civilization in the 18th and 19th century. And he's going to talk a little bit here about his research. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mohammed Jagieti.
Wandagari, Timbuktu Borough. Thank you very much. I say in Songwe language, thank you for Bruce Hall, because he's now Timbuktian. He stayed with us more than 3 years, or I don't know how many now. So I stayed in Timbuktu more than 6 months in Timbuktu. You know, Timbuktu is too hot. It is sandy. It is not easy, but he stayed with us. When I went there for the first time, I met him. He told me, you are a first student, Malian student. I met her for research, and that time I was preparing my PhD. So he knows Timbuktu more than me. Before I start, I say again, thank you for Caroline Brown and Chika and all the people who organize this symposium. I think it is a big pleasure for us to be with you, to know we have the other people who think about Timbuktu. It is not easy for me to speak after Sheikh Hamu, who did everything. Me, I try just to give you a summary knowledge about Fulani who were in Timbuktu. Because when we speak about Timbuktu, we don't speak about Fulani. So now, something which we will see in this presentation. Before I start, I think it is good to explain Fulani people are the nomad people. They are with cow. And between 18th and the 19th centuries, they founded many, many states, from Senegal to Mali to Nigeria. So we have 3 big states: Nigeria with Usman Danfodio, Mali we have Seko Ahmadou Bari, and Senegal we have Abdul Qadir Khan with Al-Hajj Umar. So, and at that time, they were the big reformists in Islam. Timbuktu, which is a cosmopolitan, commercial, and intellectual city, has attracted several populations, including Fulani. The latter, just like the other population, have also contributed to the intellectual influence of Timbuktu. But when did the Fulani arrive in Timbuktu? What are the most famous Fulani family in the city? What role did the Fulani play in Timbuktu? I try to respond on these 3 questions. The arrival of Fulani in Timbuktu. It is difficult, even impossible, to specify the exact year for the arrival of the first Fulani in Timbuktu. We can still confirm that 2 Fulani families, Gidado and Burdo, are more or less known according to our famous chronicle, Tarikh al-Fattash. I think the people know it very well. And Tarikh al-Sudan and Tazkirat al-Nisan. I think today it is very, very difficult to speak about Malian medieval history, and we don't speak about these sources. So, I focus on these just to find some information about Fulani. So our colleagues also tell us about other Fulani who came to Timbuktu for a short time and for many, many reasons. Some people, Fulani, who came in Timbuktu, come like a prisoner of war. We can give an example. Hamadi Aisha, who was the king of Masina, deported to Timbuktu, was imprisoned until his death. And Saadi, who is the Tarikh al-Sudan author, speaks about Aisha al-Fulanis. She took it from Masina to Timbuktu, and she was married with his grandfather. And some people, Fulani came to Timbuktu. Why? For reconciliation. We have Hamadi Amina, for example, when Basha Mahmud arrested the son of Sid Mahmud bin Omar. Mahmud bin Omar, from a big family, what we say Aqit family. He was a big judge. Do you know when Moroccan occupied Timbuktu, 1591, they wanted to depart the scholar to Marrakesh, and he arrested some scholar from Aqid family. What this event happened, Hamadi Amina, who was the Masina king, came to ask Mahmud bin Omar to let them free. It should be noted that they wanted to appoint Hamadi Amina to some position, but he refused that. Some people or some Fulani came to Timbuktu when with Masina Empire or Masina State. I think it is good to explain in Masina Empire. It was a short empire, about 45 years. And we had three rulers or kings. Their name is Amadou, three Amadou. The first one is Ahmad Lobo, who reigned 28 years. He is the son Amadou. Sometimes we say Amadou Sekou in local literature, from 1845 till 1853. And the third and the last, Amadou, reigned from 1833 till 1862. So when Al-Hajj Omar came from west to occupy Alhamdulillah, the capital of empire. So in Ahmed Lobo or Masina Empire, we have some people or some Fulani sent to Timbuktu. For example, Ahmed Said bin Baba Said was in Timbuktu, but Sekou Amadou, the first king of Masina, make him a judge. But it's good to explain again. In Timbuktu, we have just three judges of Fulani, or three judges nominated by king. We have Abdul Qadir. After him, we have Baba, he is Fulani. And the third is Usman bin Usman, known Muhammad al-Kabiri. So we have other Ahmed bin Omar, who was responsible for political, and we had Al-Haji Said. This is for example, because no long. And some Fulani came to Timbuktu. Why? To learn. I give just two names: Al-Fanuh bin Tahir, discipline of Sheikh Al-Mukhtar Al-Kunti. Al-Mukhtar Al-Kunti is the big scholar. We say he wrote about 300 manuscripts, 300 titles of books. So with him, what we say in West Africa, Al-Qadiriyya, the Sufism tariqa, become famous and become anywhere in Mali and Nigeria, all this area. So he learned with Mukhtar Al-Kunti, and Al-Fanuh Tahir was again the advisor of Gelajo. Gelajo was a king of Kunari, a small state governed by Gelajo. So he was his advisor. But when Ahmad Lobo founded Masina Empire, he joined Ahmed Lobo to become, if you want, a minister of education or a theorian of the king. He write what we say ظهور الخليفة الثاني عشر. The letter to say Ahmad Lobu is the 12th Khalifa who in area. So everybody must accept his bay'ah. The second is Abdullah bin Ahmad Lobo, the son of Sekou Amadou. He was sent again to Timbuktu to learn with Ahmed al-Abbakay. Ahmed al-Abbakay, so it is the Konta family. He was a big scholar and really when Ahmed III became a king, he wasn't happy because he wanted to Abdullah become a king. Now I told you we know just two big family Fulani in Timbuktu. The Gidado family. We know a little bit about Gidado family. But the first name which we know is Abu Bakr. Sometimes we say Abu Bakr Gidado, Fulani. And when did he came to Timbuktu? We don't know many things about him. But we can say something is true. Gidado family monopolized the imama in Jingreber. Jingreber, I think we will see, it is the big mosque in Timbuktu, which we say Kanka Musa, when he came, he make it larger than the first. And we will see after a lot of the family of Gidado become imam. Imam is somebody who guide a prayer and mosque. So this is Jingreber picture. So the first who we know from Gidado family is Muhammad bin Abi Bakr Gidado al-Fulani. He was the first name of the Gidado family in Jingreber. He was righteous, pious, and holy imam. He has been appointed imam of Jingreber after the death of Uthman bin al-Hassan al-Tishiti by Al-Qadi al-Aqib. Al-Qadi al-Aqib again from Akiti family. So he, what we say, he is known for restoration of the mosque. Jingreber, Sidi Yahya, Sankore, he know by that. When Uthman bin al-Hassan al-Tishiti died, the faithful of the Jingreber mosque didn't agree on who will be the imam between Ahmad bin al-Imam Siddiq and Muhammad Gidado. That is why Al-Qadi Al-Aqib chose him. He assured the Jingreber imamate for 12 years. And he passed away on Sunday, 5/3/1581. And this is the last from Gidado family. We have Abdul Salam, we have Baba Sa'id, we have Salih bin Ahmad, Abdul Qadir Kafi, Abdul Rahman, Siddiq, Wadi'atullah, Salih, and Sa'id bin Baba. I speak about him. He was a judge, but only Sa'id bin Baba bin Abdul Rahman, who is not Gidado family, between the Fulani who become the Jingreber imam. Muhammad Wadi'atullah and Al-Mukhtar bin Ibrahim Uthman Saleh. So this is a Jingreber list of Fulani who become imamate. We have Sidi Yahya or Muhammad Nadu Mosque. There, this is Sidi Yahya Mosque. This is the door which in Timbuktu they say when it's open, it is the end of war. So when the Islamists occupied Timbuktu in 12, they open the door. This is just to show how this is the place of the door. So we know a single Fulani who become Imam of this mosque. This is a Jaras consult, Greek scholar Usman bin Muhammad bin Demba Sule al-Fulani, who died in 1599. And the third mosque, what we say, Al-Qasba. Al-Qasba means the place when Moroccan come in Timbuktu, occupied Timbuktu, they built it for them. So when Sid Mahmoud came to Timbuktu, it was the what we say Eid al-Adha, the Tabaski festival. He asked Al-Aqib to send an imam for the Eid to make a prayer for him. Then he sent Muhammad bin Abi Bakr Gidado to become an imam. After this prayer, so he asked him to stay imam and the mosque. And we have the Market Mosque. The Market Mosque, really, I didn't find it in the area, but in the history we found it. We have some people said Al-Aqib built him, but it is not true. Al-Aqib just restored this mosque. And we have some Fulani imam there. First one is Baba bin Sa'id, Al-Hajj Abdurrahman, the great saint, scholar of Hadith, died after having spent 10 years in imamat. And we have his son, but we don't found the name. And Alfa Ahmad and Al-Imam Baba bin Muhammad. So it's good to say, and the sources which we read, we didn't find any Fulani Imam from Sankore Mosque. It is something amazing for me, really. So this is Sankore Mosque, and the restoration, it is a public work to restore the mosque. Not only Sankore, we have the same thing in Jingreber too. Now the Gidado family. Like the Gidado family, the Gourdo family is better known. It has greatly contributed to the intellectual life of Timbuktu. We get the members of this family not only in the city of Timbuktu, but also we get them scattered in the Timbuktu region and the area of Kabara, Kirshamba, and other places of Timbuktu area. The first person of Gidado family is poorly known, but for Muhammad Gidado, we know many things about him. Muhammad Gourdo, he was born 1574, died 1656. Al-Faqih Muhammad Gourdo is a descendant of an intellectual Fulani family. His father, Muhammad, sometimes we say Modi in Fulani, and sometimes we say Modi. Modi Sajo was Al-Qadi. Muhammad Gourdo was born, and we say it, he came to Timbuktu in 1594 when he was very young, at the age of 23. Just 3 years after the occupation of Timbuktu. I told you Timbuktu was occupied in 1591. Why did he come to Timbuktu? To learn. He was a great friend of Abdullah bin Imran Asadi, the father of the author of Tariq al-Sudan, and only this that separated them. After spending several years studying and becoming a great scholar, his father came to Timbuktu to bring him back to the village, and Saadi fathers prevented him from doing so. He accepted his advice and left without a son. Muhammad Guru took advantage of this to deepen his knowledge because Timbuktu was full of scholars. He studied among great scholars like Ahmed Baba and others. His father came again to Timbuktu to take him back, but he became ill and he passed away in Timbuktu. Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagayogo, really we have a long list of Muhammad Guru, but I choose just to give an example. Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagayogo or Bagaya died in 1652. It may be. He is the grandson of Muhammad Guru, but Muhammad Sajo, he knows little about his biography, but we can assume that he was born in Timbuktu, from where he grew up and learned from his great scholar. That allowed him to be a great scholar for giving al-ijaza. Al-ijaza is what we say, the diploma or the attestation to say, like now PhD, master, etc., etc. Ahmed bin Sheikh As-Suqi sent a letter to Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagigo bin Muhammad Guru to say, from someone far to Sheikh Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagayo, greeting you and the reason for writing to you, even if someone is said to write to you. I haven't studied hadith for a long time, and yet I am done. So I thought and tried to get a professor of hadith. Then I was told that there was a scholar of hadith in Timbuktu. When I heard that, I was very blessed and praised Allah for having given us a scholar as him. Just what is the letter to ask him if he can come to Timbuktu to learn a hadith with him. I think it is to explain something. When we say Muhammad Bagayo, some people who know the Timbuktu story will be Muhammad Bagayo is a Wangara. Yes, it's true. Muhammad Bagayo now is the Ahmed Baba teacher. He said he spent more than 20 years with Muhammad Bagayogo. This Muhammad Bagayogo, he's Fulani. He just took Muhammad Bagayogo name. For example, why this? We say in Arabic, Tayammun. Just to say, I want my son become a big scholar like Muhammad Bagayogo. Why? They give the name Muhammad Bagayo of Fulani Muhammad. So, Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagayo is known by the ijazat. We will just show some example. Okay. So, okay. This is just to show an example. It is not clear. أحمد السوقي قراءة مني عليه للجميع وختمت قراءته له على سيدي والدي كما أخبره به والده أحمد السوقي. So Ahmed السوقي who sent a letter explain and this where he took إجازة, what we say, the attestation. So I say, he said أخبرني محمد بن محمد بن محمد بغيا إجازة قائلا أخبرني به شيخنا والدي محمد بغيا قائلا أخبرني بذلك سيدي ووالدي محمد غورو. So he said, I took this إجازة from Muhammad, son of Muhammad Bagayo, from Muhammad Guru. So we have many ijazah and hadith and fiqh and grammar from Muhammad bin Muhammad Bagayo bin Muhammad Guru, the Fulani. So an example, we have Alpha Ahmad Tau from the same family, who was Sheikh Al-Maddah, or the panegyrist leader who sang prose to Prophet Muhammad peace Ali sur lui. He died 1735 in Timbuktu. So I think it is to explain what we say the Maddah or the panegyrist leader. In Timbuktu, what we say the celebration of Mawlid al-Nabawi, or the Prophet Naissance birthday. So we have the book, I think Sheikh Hamo is here to explain it very well. 1 month before that, Safar, they spend all this month to learn about the Prophet count and the date of celebration, so they spend all the week, all the day to read it. So Alpha Ahmed Tagu was a leader because we have somebody who reads well about these panegyrists. We have the old Baba Samba. He is the son of Muhammad Bagayo, Bunmodi, Muguro. He was a great calligraph who lived in Kabara, near of Timbuktu. So when we read the manuscripts, and the colophon, many manuscripts, we found these family people who copied the manuscripts. For example, I told you they were in Kabara. Kabara is near Timbuktu, about 7 kilometers. And Kirshambaso, it is a village not far from in Timbuktu. We have some people there. The other Fulani who came to Timbuktu, not from Gidaro or Gur family, Ahmed at-Timbuktawi and Baba Sule, just 2 examples. Ahmed Timbuktawi, he's Ahmed bin Al-Qadi Abi Bakr bin Yusuf bin Ibrahim Al-Futi Al-Jawjaqi Al-Timbuktawi Al-Janawi. So in his nisba, the origin we say he came from Fouta Jalon in Senegal, studied in Jenne, it was a big center, before permanently settled in Timbuktu. His father Abu Bakr was a Qadi, a judge. So what we can say about Ahmed Al-Qadi? Ahmed Al-Qadi went to Mecca for pilgrims. When he was going, he go by Morocco, and there he found the people in boat. They did many things not Islamic law. So he write Shikayatul-Din al-Muhammadi, a book to Moroccan king to say, you must be careful. You have the people in boat, they don't do the Islamic practice. And when he came to Tunisia, he did the same thing. He write, حتى الصدق فيما عليه سودان أو عبيد تونس من الكفر. And he said, we have the people in Tunisia, they do the practice, not Islamic practice. So you must enter their, how you say, stop that. Some so was judged in Masina, and he came to Timbuktu and he stayed there. He passed away 1742. Conclusion. We have seen that the Fulanis have also played their role in the intellectual development and the influence of Timbuktu. We note that their responsibility is ushering the imamat of Jengreber is more preponderant than others' roles, such as justice, education, etc. We believe that other families, such as the Gedado and the Gur families, not only played a significant role in Timbuktu, but their discovery records further research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chagiete. We're going to turn to Shahid, Dr. Shahid Mathi. So let's set up. I'll introduce you. So Dr. Mohammed Shahid Mathi is in the Department of Religion at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He has a PhD from the University of Cape Town in the Department of History. I should know this because I was on his dissertation committee, so I should know which department, I guess. He has produced this really wonderful dissertation on disputes about marriage, divorce, amongst the scholars of Timbuktu in the 20th century. And has used this really, really rich set of disputes and debates and characters, and he's tied this to the sort of social history of the town in the 20th century. So it's really wonderful stuff. And he's going to give us a taste, I think, of this project here this afternoon. So join me in welcoming Dr. Mohammed Shahid Mathi.
Good morning and assalamu alaikum to all. Please allow me to say a few things. Firstly, my deep gratitude and appreciation to the University of Rutgers, the Department of African Studies, especially to Professor Carol Brown and her team, many people, for the generous invitation to this very important symposium. Allow me also to say that a day or two after Donald Trump issued his executive order banning human beings or individuals from 7 countries with Muslim majorities, a group of academics called for a boycott of academic conferences in the United States in solidarity with people from the 7 countries. As a principle, I understand and accept personally a boycott that calls for human beings to show solidarity with their fellow wronged human beings. As a black person who experienced racism and dehumanization under apartheid-ruled white South Africa, I deeply and I've learned to appreciate the meaning of solidarity. Solidarity was shown with us as black South Africans during the apartheid era. But I came to this very important symposium firstly in respect to the commitment I made on accepting the invitation 2 months before the tumultuous developments of the last 2 months, then January 20th in the United States. Much hard work and planning went into the making of this symposium. But secondly also, and perhaps my own selfish interest linked to my research work on the Timbuktu manuscripts. In this context also, my deep gratitude to the selflessness, the anger, the justice, and love shown by hundreds of individuals who are citizens of the United States in their rejection of the ban, in solidarity with their fellow human beings from 7 countries, as well as the proposed wall for Mexico. This, I think, deserves our mention and gratitude. Many individuals in your land, this land, spoke truth to power and strove against unjust policies the last centuries. Indeed, this symposium is indicative of that. The so-called many Indian tribes, the slaves, those from Timbuktu, villages here in Timbuktu, the slaves, in the words of Bob Marley, stolen from Africa, and many, many activists, Martin Luther, Malcolm X. We remember also people like Trevor Brown, Martin, Mike Brown, the 9 church martyrs, and others. So it's indeed, I hope that we can show our honor to them. In honor of them, in fact, I request a few seconds of silence. Thank you. Now to my presentation. Now what I want to do in this presentation is to look at what is called in Arabic nushuz fatwas. I'll explain both terms. Let me start with a fatwa because the presentation goes around fatwas. So a fatwa is an Islamic legal opinion. It is given by a jurisconsult. A question is asked or an incident comes up and a jurisconsult responds in answer. In the Judaic literature, it's the similarity of responsa. Okay, so when a rabbi, for example, is asked the question, he would give a answer. So in the Islamic law tradition, we have the muftis or a jurisconsult. Nushuz, basically, and with much oversimplification, in the context of Islamic law and a Muslim marriage, refers to a wife who is disobedient to her husband. I'm sure we'll have a good discussion out of that. Okay. Such a wife is called nashiza. I'm not going to go into the deep meaning and of the word nushuz, etc. Nushuz includes inter alia a wife leaving the house without the husband's permission, having friends he does not approve of, not taking care of the home, and refusing the husband's sex. Islamic substantive law, which is one genre of Islamic law, there are two other genres, stipulates certain measures a husband can take against his nashiza, this quote-unquote rebellious wife, to discipline her. These include admonishing her, cutting off of maintenance, abandoning the marital bed, and even beating. In this presentation, I said I look at fatwas, which is another genre of Islamic law, on nushuz. These fatwas, of course, hail from Timbuktu, 20th century, during the colonial era. My interest in these fatwas, however, is there being a source of the quotidian, everyday life in Timbuktu. Thus, I am not concerned with the descriptions and prescriptions of nushuz contained, in other words, this about a rebellious wife, contained in the manuals of Islamic substantive law. The fatwas, or these Islamic legal opinions, tell us something other tell us about some things other than law, such as attitudes, behaviors, and even agencies of wives, but also how Muslim scholars understood Islamic law in Timbuktu during the 20th century. Now, sometime during the colonial, and what you're seeing there, that is actually I treat the fatwa, though it is not, this one is not technically a fatwa because it comes from it was in a colonial court setting. I'll say a bit more about that. So sometime during the colonial era, a disgruntled husband referred a domestic case to Al-Qadi Abul Abbas Ahmad Baba, the first French colonial appointed Qadi of Timbuktu, even though a judge, a Qadi, even though he was a judge already before the arrival of the French. He referred the case to him. The Qadi was from a traditionally trained Muslim scholar who had acted, as I said, as a Qadi before the arrival of the French. The husband's case to the Qadi was against another man whom he claimed had corrupted his wife against him. He doesn't actually explain what corruption is, he just speaks about the word fasad. We'll come later and have to assume what the corruption is. The wife, in fact, confirmed the claim. Interesting, in front of the Qadi, she says, yes, I agree with my husband that this other guy corrupted me. Interestingly, however, she stated that she was an accomplice with the man in the corruption. The other man, however, denied the husband's charge and the wife's admission, completely said, no, I am not guilty of any corruption. On his part, the Qadi dismissed the wife's claim as baseless insofar as she failed to produce 4 witnesses required by Islamic law. Now here we get some idea, we can assume what the corruption is. In its reference to 4 witnesses, it appears safe to say that the nature of corruption claimed by the husband, admitted to by the wife, was of a sexual nature. Let me put a caveat here in order. I take these things very seriously because, at least in Timbuktu society, especially when it comes to people's personal lives, and it's a difficult area to do research in, simply because it touches on the personal. And I'm aware of how the people of Timbuktu would feel. Let me also say here, and in a way it shows the uniqueness of Timbuktu's manuscript, or rather the written tradition in general Africa. In the written tradition, things are there for you to see. They were quite open, they were quite frank about things. It's in the oral tradition where things are, in a sense, people tell you, no, it's probably just hypothetical. And one has to take into account how the local people feel. I think it's very important that we show that respect. So I don't discuss these things with ease, and especially in the presence of scholars from Timbuktu. But I just think I need to say that. But it is there, the written word. So Islamic law requires 4 witnesses to prove infidelity, for example. Whatever the truth of the case, the wife's confession claim making her would make a nashiza. Because now if she is, as she herself claims, part of this corruption, that would make a nashiza according to Islamic law. That is disobedient. The attitude and the Qadi, in fact, clearly refers, he brings up the discussion of nushuz in his deliberations. He cites her deliberate estranging from her husband. He orders her return to the marriage and obey her husband faithful as a wife. She refused. A further display of nushuz, I would think. On this, the Qadi suggested to the husband that he resorts to what is called ta'zir, a form of action, unspecified disciplinary measures outlined in substantive Islamic law, which then could include admonishing her, abandoning in the marital bed, and even beating. This Qadi did not say that. He did not say beating. If this fails to work, the husband should then think of divorcing the wife for a ransom. The source does not say what transpired further. Some muftis we find generally, let me speak just very generally, are vociferous in stating a husband's right to discipline his wife, whether she is righteous or, as one mufti puts it in one document, whether the wife is a whore. Let me just say, another mufti, however, rebukes the husband for his violence against the wife, irrespective of what the wife did or did not do. Now, as a rule, muftis or jurisconsult never called women bad names. They never called them whores. In this case, he was really speaking hypothetically. The mufti, as I said, used it hypothetically. Now, what we see here often from these fatwas, that there are variances between husbands and the religious scholars who were consulted in these spousal disputes. And this is interesting. For example, in one incident, a mufti rationalized, based on Islamic substantive law, a husband's right to use violence against his wife. The husband's concern, however, was whether he had to pay compensation and whether his act constituted what is called darar, harm, and this darar, this harm that grants the wife the choice of divorce. He even appears to regret his violence against her. He says, apparently he kicked her, knocking out a few teeth, explaining to the wife, the mufti, that he lost control on finding his wife with another man. Muftis, of course, base their responses on the well-known works of Islamic substantive law, and their fatwas are replete with references to these Islamic laws. But muftis in the quotidian, in the everyday life, were also sources of comfort for husbands, SOSs. So one guy divorced his wife. In Islamic law, if a husband gives his wife 3 divorces at once, then she's divorced. They cannot get back together again until she gets married to somebody else. That second husband divorces her, and then they can come back. One wife and husband apparently had a discussion, and then she says to him, and they had an argument, she says, give me 3, which means give me 3 divorces. The husband thought of himself very bravely, says, you want 3? I've given you 4. But very soon he realized, it's finished. 4, I can't have it. And he realized how much he loved her. He ran to the mufti, please, as an SOS, help me. And the mufti said, I understand. Okay, you love her very much and everything. We don't need to technically look at the stream. Okay. Let me, and just said, my work on these fatwa, on these Islamic legal opinions, are not focused on gender relations in marriage according to Islamic substantive law. It's not focused on reciprocal rights and duties of a husband and a wife, as you'd find. For example, a husband must give a bridal gift in return for the sexual availability of the wife. I do not employ feminist lenses or gender studies framework to read Islamic legal texts. These are noble approaches and tools, but I have a different focus. Rather, my interest is in what these sources, these fatwas tell us about other than Islamic substantive law, about the attitudes and personalities of lay people, especially wives and religious scholars in colonial Timbuktu. This approach to marriage. So therefore, if we look in this case, as I said, that we just discussed, the case is a telling example of the quotidian reality that departs, if somewhat, from the descriptions and prescriptions of Islamic substantive law in particular, and the gender hierarchy of Muslim society, or any society for that matter. The wife, as we can see, rather confidently admits to, or she invents an affair because the other guy denied. She floats her nushuz, other words. She's saying that, yes, I am nashiza. She says it both to her husband as well as to the judge. Her attitude and actions stand in clear contrast to that of both her husband and the alleged lover. She refuses to yield to authority, even that of a respected traditional scholar, an elder, and a colonial appointed qadi or judge of Timbuktu, while the two men stay clear of brushing feathers with religious and political authority. No, they don't want any. They don't take it on. The alleged lover disassociates himself from her admission come claim. The apparently cuckolded husband took issue only with the alleged lover, not the apparently self-confessed cheating wife. His only concerns appears to have been to save his marriage. The source does not say how he responded to a confession. In another incident in 1946, another fatwa, this one happened before 1931 because the judge had died by 1931. A wife entered into a second marriage, and this while in a marriage. In other words, she got married to another husband while still married to her current husband. The second marriage, of course, was duly annulled by at least 3 different muftis in Timbuktu. The fatwa interestingly tell us that when the husband intended to travel, he told his wife, she said, well, if you are not back within 15 days, I will divorce myself. According to the other fatwa, she asked the husband, what if you are not back within 15 days? And he says, you can divorce yourself. What was strange is that the husband went to another place called Tinduf. And he knew, and she knew, that the journey to Tinduf took 20 days. So I don't know how was it going to go 20 days and come back in 20 days. So of course, the muftis come later and say that this wife must have invented the 15 days. They don't say that, but anyway. Here too, in this case, the first husband's concern only was having his wife at his side. He would have nothing of her apparent improper behavior. He loved her too much, is what it seems. So we see that what Islamic law may say, what the scholars may say, but in the quotidian we find something else. I don't want to romanticize this, because there was violence and abuse, sometimes from husband, as we see in this one, for example. I will just go back to it because for reasons I said earlier, don't like to. But in this case, the husband clearly beat his wife up, and the wife comes to the mufti in this case and says to him that he's swearing at me and my mother, that he beat me up. And there's a long story why she slept out the night, because there was another custom in Timbuktu that if your guest came to visit you, you would take your guests back to their house. Timbuktu is not a very big place. But this husband apparently was violent, as the wife explains in that second one, and therefore she was afraid, because she said, I saw the anger on his face. And of course, on a very serious note, we know that what happens with gender violence, we know that sometimes what husbands do or men do to their partners, it's a very serious issue in all cultures, in all nations, throughout all times. What is interesting in this part, my time is coming. Bruce, how much time do I have? 6. Okay, I'll be finished. What is interesting, and why I'm looking at the second fatwa, is not only the quotidian of wives and husbands, but also of religious scholars. Yes, religious scholars were experts in Islamic law. They knew the Islamic substantive law manuals very well, but and they quoted it, and their opinions, their legal opinions, always refer to these. But it does not mean that they were bound to it. They had their own innovation, their own ability to look at their societies. Like the mufti, the guy who had divorced his wife 3 times, or 4 times rather, if he was going strictly according to the text, he would have said, sorry, you wanted to play bravado, you wanted to think that you're the man in the house, so now you don't have a wife. But this mufti says, I understand that you love her. Sherman Jackson, the American scholar of Islamic law, speaks about the second education of the mufti, the second education of the Islamic scholar. In other words, after you have had many years of apprentice within the schools that Sheikh Hamu referred to, for example, you have to learn the street language of people to be a mufti worth your salt. You have to understand the language they use, the solipsisms, all those things. You can only be a mufti once you know how people in the street think. And people in the street are not without power. At least that is the view of mortality and social history. So we have many fatwas that are detailed of husbands inflicting violence and emotional abuse. That all were found in Timbuktu. But here the mufti, for example, this particular mufti instructed the wife to produce witnesses to testify to corroborate a claim of her husband's abuse. There are 2 such fatwas. And when they produce the fatwas, the muftis are clear that this case requires a divorce. It's clear that no wife should endure the insults and the oppression and the violence of her husband. So we see it is not exactly that in some other Islamic schools that if a husband beats his wife, she should be patient. We would often find parents saying to the wife, go back to your husband, he will reform. We find here that muftis and Islamic scholars or clergy often stand firmly with the wife as long as she could produce her witnesses, then it was sufficient for this mufti to say that you should not endure in this marriage. There are many things in Timbuktu. Husbands too are the receiving end, let me say. One husband accepts his wife's conditions that he does not remove her from her hometown, does not marry another woman or take a concubine. Opposite to the case of the woman who was beaten by her husband, we find that sometimes mothers and their daughters are in cahoots against the husband. A mother and a daughter were in cahoots, and where the wife is found in the company of strange men, the husband does not seem to have been in a position to respond, let alone inflict his wrath. There even seems to be other affairs. Colonial documents speak about women who got married to other husbands. There may be very strong economic reasons for this. After World War II, when the salt trade had gone into decline, so husbands had to go out far to work, and wives may have thought that they would divorce but would not divorce. A 1944 fatwa tells us of a wife who extracted an oath from her husband that he would not so much as speak to another woman whom the wife suspected this husband had affection for. The husband duly complied, and he avoided his wife's potential or illusionary competitor altogether. When circumstances forced him to speak to this other woman, her son had burned, coincidentally, and he went. So on hearing her screaming, he hurried to attend. He did not speak to her, in fact, and all, just help, or he had to say some few words to her. He only consoled her in the face of a calamity and exhorted her to be patient. He then went to the mufti, said, look, I promised my wife that if I speak, so much as speak to this other woman, I'm divorced. Please tell me what's the status of my marriage. To that extent, we see how some women had control over some of their husbands. Okay, let me end by just saying this quickly. What is the importance of this quotidian? I think it's extremely important, especially if we speak of the slave heritage and the memories of slaves and people. One needs, I think, in African studies, we can appreciate when people like Kwame Nkrumah and Anta Diop, etc., spoke about the great states of Africa, about Ghana and Mali and all this, and Africa's great political intellectual history. And one can appreciate that. Yet, I think it is important that we focus on the quotidian, also because we hope to develop what is called a decolonial epistemic, because that is part, the social history, the everyday of life, to tell us about people. That we know the past, what it is, and not what we want the past to be assumed it to be. Robert Danton, for example, the historian on the French Revolution, speaks about this, how we often assume that people in Europe in the mid-18th centuries were today the same as us. They were not the same. We need to know what their past were like. But also because I think it can help us to imagine a different future. In fact, Timbuktu, at the same time that Marc Bloch, and my thoughts and memory with him as the Nazis executed this important historian, and Lefebvre were writing the Annales school and the Annales. At the same time, we have a man called Bul Araf, who I think, perhaps not in the complex ways what happened in Europe, but was a social historian. And Bul Araf, in fact, is the producer of the second fatwa, who looks at all these minute details that you usually do not find in fatwas. You only find a privileged answer of this scholar. And in 1929, he writes about Timbuktu, he writes about people, and he was indeed a great scholar. So we have this, and I think that at least it can also contribute to gender theory, gender framework, gender studies, and feminist theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Shahid Mathi. Our final speaker of this session is Dr. Mauro Nobili. Teaches history at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He has a PhD from the University of Napoli Orientale. So, and his PhD is in African Studies. He is himself from Italy, and his work the book manuscript that he's working on now, and from which many very interesting articles have been published and are in the works, concerns a rereading and a reconstruction of one of the most problematic manuscripts and texts from Timbuktu, the Tariq al-Fatash. And this is a text which has been, how should I say, reinvented. It has a very complicated history and has been revised, let's just say, in its various copies over time. And so one of the things that Professor Nobly is doing is unpacking that and really, I think, revising what we understand of this very important historical chronicle. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Bruce, for your introduction, and thank you, Caroline, and the whole team for organizing this conference. My talk of today is called The Complicated History of a Timbuktu Chronicle, the Tariq al-Fatash. Actually, it's quite complicated now to give a presentation after the fantastic presentation of Shahid, especially, it's very deep remarks at the beginning. But I think I also have a remark that is kind of detached from what I'm doing that is important to do, is that often in Western academia, being it Europe or North America, there is this disturbing tendency of not collaborating with African scholars. And this is something that is unacceptable from an ethical point of view and unproductive from an intellectual point of view, because what you can learn from African scholars is not in the book and not even in our beloved manuscripts. So actually, I'm going to talk about something that is part of my book that hopefully is going to be published soon, otherwise I don't get tenured. Anyway, it is of course my voice talking, but I'm glad that many of the people who are behind my book are actually sitting here with me, because this project started in several long nights spent drinking coffee with Shahid in his house in Cape Town, and he was coming back from Johannesburg, spending time with his family, actually spending time with me, not with his family. Then there is a lot of work that I've done with Mohamed Jagayeti in South Africa, who was a roommate of mine in South Africa, in Mali, in Ivory Coast, in Ghana. We've been detained together at the border of Ivory Coast. In America, because I managed to get him here, and I saw him exhausted at the end of his stay. Please, Mauro, don't give me any manuscript anymore to read. And of course, when we can't read stuff, there is only one solution at the end of the day. You know what? Let's call Sheikham. So, yeah, basically this is me, but actually it's a collective effort that I'm going to share with you. So what I want to do today is to talk about this famous chronicle, the Tariq al-Fatash, that we can translate more or less as the chronicle of the obstinate researcher. I think many of you are Fatash in a way. That, according to people, is a 16th or a 17th century chronicle, and on the historiography of this chronicle. Then I want to tell you what I think about this chronicle. It is quite revolutionary, because I believe that the chronicle has to be understood as a 19th century chronicle produced in support of one of the states that Dr. Jagayeti introduced. They called it the Massina state. I like to call him the Caliphate of Hamdallah. So the story starts with the French conquest of Timbuktu, which happened first on December the 16th, 1893. Because once the French eventually managed to put their hands on this, fabled city of Timbuktu, looked at after from the time of, Leo Africanus in Europe and even earlier. So this very famous newspaper of the time, Le Figaro, sent this guy, Félix Dubois, to document the newly conquered city. And Dubois in 1995 published his famous article, Le Figaro à Timbuktu. But then eventually in 1996, he produced a bestseller, Timbuktu la Mystérieuse, the mysterious Timbuktu. It has gone through several re-editions, and this is a quite recent one. People tend to dismiss Dubois, but of course he was a big supporter of colonizing civilization, etc. But he's actually the first person since the time of Leo Africanus who was impressed by the amount of books that were in Timbuktu. And of course, using the racist tone of the time, and allow me to quote from him, he said that the learned doctors of Timbuktu were, to use an expression which might appear strange when applied to Negroes, bibliophiles. The libraries of Timbuktu may be said to have included almost the whole of Arabian literature. So by the end of the 19th century, people in Europe started knowing that Timbuktu was a city of learning. But among the books that Félix Dubois found, one book, the Tarikh al-Fattash, or Fettasi as he called it, really attracted his attention. And he said, under the title of Fettasi, Koti, its author, edited the history of the kingdoms of Ganata, Songhai, Timbuktu from their origin until 1554. In spite of the most persistent research, I have not been able to procure more than fragments of this important work. Everyone knows all about it, but no one possesses it. It is the phantom book of the Sudan. Actually, the Fattash did not stay phantom book for a long time, because less than 20 years after Dubois, these two guys that you can see there on vacation with kids, colonial administrator and scholars of the time, an Orientalist, Hudas, and an Africanist, De La Fosse, edited in 1913 what they believed to be a reliable text of the Tarikh al-Fattash. So according to them, and to scholars who worked on the Fattash after, the chronicle was originally written in Timbuktu. I mean, it's a chronicle of Timbuktu and its region, supposedly written between the 15th and the 16th century by a scholar called Mahmoud Kati. By the way, you lived a very long life, according to this reconstruction, 125 years. Anyway, he couldn't write it until the end, because the final pieces of the Tarikh al-Fattash actually date back to the 17th century. So 125 was fine, 200 no. So the idea that emerged is that actually a nephew, a maternal nephew, actually grandson, sorry, of Mahmoud Kati, a guy called Ibn al-Mukhtar, completed this chronicle. But still it's not fine, because there are more pieces that clearly reflect later times. So somebody slightly modified the chronicle later on. So since that time, since, as you can imagine, this chronicle is quite complicated, author living for several centuries and manipulation, etc. It has attracted the attention of very many scholars. I mean, you already mentioned John Anwick, or Nehemiah Levtzion, or the famous Malian scholars, Madin Ali, published substantive work on the Fattash, focusing mainly on two problems, that of authorship and that of the extent of this interpolation. And actually, I should have added a very recent edition from the Ahmed Center in Timbuktu of a new edition of the Tarikh al-Fattash, in which they introduced even a third character as an alleged author. So there was like one person, then a second one, then a third one, and a fourth one. So this chronicle never finishes, basically. Yet, the Tarikh al-Fattash is most likely one of the most famous chronicles written in West Africa. And for example, the recent book by Usman Khan from Harvard, Beyond Timbuktu, still mentions the Tarikh al-Fattash as one of the most important sources for African history prior to the 17th century. And I use here, for example, an image from a website of UNESCO, because the Tarikh al-Fattash has been introduced in the UNESCO collection of representative works of world literature, Africa, Syriac, Arabic. So when we talk about the Tarikh al-Fattash, we're not talking about a minor chronicle, so we're talking about a substantial source for African history. But I think that all the literature that exists on the Fattash is strongly influenced by the approach of Félix Dubois, the first guy who heard about the Timbuktu, who basically considered that the chronicle was originally written in the 16th century, and then something happened later on, but we're not really interested in that. We are interested in the original chronicle. And in this way, it's following and inaugurated a way to approach the Fattash that follows an unfortunate approach to African literary production that is fantastically synthesized by Augustine Hall, is a specialist of the Sudan, so not on West Africa. But he says that, so the approach to scholarship, to written scholarship from Africa, is characterized, and I'm quoting from him, you can see it in the slide, by heavy reliance on textual evidence, which is studied following, above all, a philological approach. The approach aims to retrieve the original or archetypal frame of historical documents, which are therefore considered to have been corrupted by lengthy series of interpolations and or copy's mistakes. In doing so, inconsistencies and contradictions discovered are relegated to the status of accidents in the chain of transmission of historical information. So historians have been obsessed romantically by the original Tarikh al-Fatash, what was written first. But don't you believe that originals are actually quite boring? I think that forgeries, fakes, are much more appealing than originals. So, in my first year teaching at University of Illinois, I was teaching a course on the method. So I went back and read Mark Bloch. And Bloch has a fantastic quote about forgery. He says, to establish the fact of forgery is not enough. It is further necessary to discover its motivation. Above all, a fraud in its way is a piece of evidence. Merely to prove that the famous charter of Charlemagne to the Church of Aix-la-Chapelle is not authentic is to avoid an error, but not to acquire knowledge. On the other hand, should we succeed in proving that the forgery was committed by the followers of Frederick Barbarossa, and that it was designed to implement dreams of imperial grandeur, we open new vistas upon the vast perspective of history. So saying which parts of the Fatash were not written in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, okay, it's fine. But why did people do something more later on? So I ended up spending the last 3 years of my life making sense of the forgeries in the Tarikh al-Fatash. So basically, I went back, of course, to the edition of the text. And I started realizing that actually there is much more behind this forgery than mere copies, mistakes, or very naive introduction of pieces that were not part of the original chronicle. So to understand the story, we need to go back and understand how this edition, the 1913, by the two French guys, was produced. So it was produced mainly on the basis of two manuscripts. One manuscript A that was copied, so we have two copies of the same, and manuscript C. And scholars have noticed that manuscript AB was actually manipulated to produce what we have as manuscript C. But the extent of this manipulation has been completely, missed by scholars working on it. Because manuscript C is in fact an ingenious modification of the first two manuscripts that is based on removing passages of the text and substituting these passages with new ones in a way that even a famous scholar like Nehemiah Lev Zion, who produced most likely the most important work on the Fatash, did not understand. So once we understand that these two manuscripts actually preserve substantially different texts, if we read them as a separate text, we realize that the first manuscript it's simply a 17th century chronicle. No problems, no mistake, no long life, no people live for 200 years. With a clear author, this guy called Ibn al-Mukhtar. We only know him by the name of his father. Ibn al-Mukhtar in Arabic means the son of al-Mukhtar. While manuscript C is in fact a chronicle written in the 19th century. Now, of course, I don't have the time to go in the philological detail to explain you why we can prove that manuscript C is a 19th century chronicle. But I want to share with you the smoking gun. That is always the funny thing that, we really need. It's a manuscript that has been in France for a long time. It is a short version of the Tarikh al-Fatash that in Arabic make very clear who is the author of this chronicle, because it starts by saying this is the chronicle by the jurisprudent Nuh ibn Tahir ibn Musa, who called it the Tarikh al-Fatash. Of course, when I first read this manuscript, I said, no. I know that the Tarikh al-Fatash was written by Mahmud Kati, the guy that I mentioned at the beginning. That maybe somebody called Ibn al-Mukhtar did something, but surely this Nuh ibn Tahir didn't know anything about the Fatash, and I was wrong. So who is this Nuh ibn Tahir? Nuh ibn Tahir is a very famous 19th century scholar who was closely associated again to Ahmad Lobbo that Jagayeti mentioned the Caliph of Masina, or of the Caliphate of Hamdallahi, the way I like to call it. So if we study manuscript C as an independent work, we realize that actually it is a meta-historical chronicle in legitimation of this 19th century state that is located more or less in central Mali. You can see it in the map with my horrible blue, circle. Why I call it meta-historical? Because they never talk about Ahmed Lobo. They talk about the Middle Age. But we can read between the Middle Age references to the 19th century state. So basically, the Tariq al-Fattash as a whole is a rhetorical tool that describes by a series of prophecies that happened in the 15th century, but that foretell the arrival of Ahmed Lobo as a legitimate West African Islamic ruler of its own time. So what it does, the Tariq al-Fattash basically embeds in the medieval history of West Africa proofs of legitimacy of the 19th century. And it does it not by inventing a chronicle by scratch, that would be a little bit maybe too much and a little bit unlikely, but by modifying a chronicle that was already existing on the ground, by putting in stuff, by removing things that were not useful, by introducing a prophecy, by introducing issues related, for example, to the ownership of the caliph on several groups of West Africa who became slaves of the king, like crown slaves. But then can you imagine, honestly, somebody reading a chronicle written by the closest advisor of Ahmed Lobo, who says, no, Ahmed Lobo is really the caliph of West Africa, and I'm proving this. It's like, I don't know, the advisor of Trump going out and saying, in the 15th century somebody, foretold the arrival of Trump. People won't believe it. The same happened with Ahmed Lobo. So what was at stake there was to prove that the authorship of the chronicle was to somebody else. So a new character is introduced in the chronicle. The guy who had been ascribed the authorship of the chronicle originally, that Mahmoud Kati that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, was a famous scholar from Timbuktu in the 15th century. So who better than a well-known, well-recognized scholar can be chosen to basically write a piece, a chronicle that predicts the arrival of a 19th century Islamic reformer. The result that we have right now is that the text that we all use, we all teach, we all quote for our classes, research on West Africa, is a mess. Because it's a chronicle that is a text that conflates together two completely different works. One written in the 17th century and one in the 19th century. And just to give you like a funny example, why this Mahmoud Kati is so old? Of course, because they conflated the information about Mahmoud Kati in the 17th century and the one in the 19th century. But if you separate the two manuscripts, Kati is a guy who lived in the 16th century, while if you read the other chronicle, you read about him as a scholar who lived in a different time. Or, for example, a city is built in 1498, but then in the next sentence you read that this city was already existing before. Why? Because, of course, they combine together the information from one of the chronicles and the one in the second chronicle. That often were very contradicting, because if you remove it from the old chronicle, it means they didn't make sense in the new context. So basically what I want to say is that the Tariq al-Fattash, this very well-known chronicle, is not a 16th century chronicle. It's not a 17th century chronicle, as scholars have advanced. It is an apocryphal work written in the 19th century by this guy, Nuhu ibn Tahir, that Jageti also mentioned before as one of the students of Timbuktu, of the big scholars of the late 19th century. So Nuhu ibn Tahir wrote his own chronicle by modifying an older chronicle, but then he ascribed it to an earlier scholar to make it credible. Well, actually, the Tariq al-Fattash is a 19th century work. So it tells us a story of the 19th century. This forgery is evidence not from the ancient past of West Africa, but from the 19th century West Africa. And as a more general observation, we talk about Timbuktu manuscripts, Timbuktu manuscripts, Timbuktu manuscripts. But actually, apart from these few people who are here, I don't think we can count many people who are working with the Timbuktu manuscripts. Nobody gets translated. Nobody gets, analyzed. Yet, even those few texts that apparently were known exist in very disappointing formats. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Nobly. So due to my mismanagement of the time, we've run a little bit over. I will ask whether we can have some questions, or should we? Okay. So my apologies again but it seems a shame to come all this way and not be able to finish your paper. So that's my organizing principle of leniency with time. So if there are any questions, maybe we can take a few questions if anybody would like. Yeah.
Nobody's remarked on the role of the slave trade and slavery in Timbuktu, which I've read about. Perhaps I've mistaken that as more important than it was, but I'd love to hear what you think of that and what its place was in the culture of Timbuktu and its history.
Could I make a suggestion that we collect a couple of questions, and since we don't have that much time, and then we can field them as a group? I'm sorry? Same question. Paul?
I'd like to know more about Ahmed al-Timbuktawi, whether is there any evidence that he was in contact with the leadership of Timbuktu, or is there any evidence that he actually ever went there? What happened when he went back to Timbuktu?
You're trying to take this so that you can speak in the microphone. The whole program is being taped.
Okay. I'd like to repeat. I'd like to know more about Ahmed al-Timbuktawi, about his return to West Africa, whether there's any evidence that he was in contact with leadership in Sokoto, and whether he actually ever went there.
Excuse me, I'm gonna try to make sense. My concern, thought is about how much of the knowledge production of the local people before Islam is incorporated with the knowledge production of Islam as the texts are being developed, whether it be the George text or even the people who came to Mali, because it seems that there had to be knowledge already, and students were coming to Timbuktu. So that's that conversion that makes those texts maybe different, if at all.
Okay, unless someone else would like to jump in, why don't we handle the three questions that we've had? Yeah, Moro first.
Can you hear me? Okay. I didn't know how to make this work. I would like to start from the last question, maybe because it's the one that I remember the best. The issue of Islam, knowledge prior to Islam. In the specific case of Timbuktu, it's quite complicated because Timbuktu is a city that is born as an Islamic city. Okay? So Timbuktu has been, and it prouds itself of being a city of Islam from day one, from its own foundation. But the issue that I think it's important to underline is that the spread of Islam and of Islamic culture does not wipe out what exists on the ground. So in every Islamic context, there is also always a combination with this global level, that is Islam, and what is local traditions, including, of course, local knowledge. And Shahid is a specialist of Islamic law, not me. But there is also, for example, as part of Islamic law, there is a specific place for Urf, or traditional law. So just sticking to the issue of law. So how to incorporate local law into a newly Islamized civilization. So I would say definitely in the manuscripts of Timbuktu you can read a lot about traditional knowledge within an Islamic context that is not necessarily important from overseas, I mean from the north or whatever, because I think that the spread of Islam always brings to a mix. And what is interesting for me, and unfortunately what scholars never do, is not really to study what is Islamic and what is not, but how these two apparently, foreign system of thoughts, eventually they mesh up to create peculiar local forms of Islam that are still Islamic, but that are peculiar of the place we're talking about. I don't know if this makes sense.
So maybe just to add to what Maura, I think I concur with my colleague on that. I think just it's important that often when we look at these is to have a more methodological approach. And I think because of various factors, we often have an ideological approach, assuming the separation. I think elsewhere Mauro speaks about this, the relationship between the so-called center and the periphery. These must be collapsed, because even if you go back to Islam itself in Mecca, it was at one stage at the periphery and it becomes a center. So we're all the time moving in between the center and the periphery. I think that is true for all knowledge traditions, etc. So you may find manuscripts on traditional healing. There was one written by a scholar in the court of Osman bin Fudi, on traditional healing. So all these are there, but it is how it is brought together with precise Islamic. And as Sulaiman Jang, I think is a philosopher somewhere, speaks about the matter of an onion. The more you take off an onion, the more it looks the same, and that is really how we are. But I do think and understand and appreciate often why we have this ideological simply because of Africa's negation and so. But all these things develop together. I do think there is the potential, and we should see, yes, what contributions were made. Certainly there's place for that, but from a methodological rather than an ideological approach.
Thank you very much. For me, I think I have just one question about Ahmed bin al-Qadi. But before I give the answer, I think it is good to go back just to complete Sheikh Hamu when he speaks about scholars and knowledge in Timbuktu. For example, when we say Sankore University, a lot of people think when we go to Timbuktu, we found a big building like which we see now in the world. The faculty, the high school, etc., etc. For me, when we speak about Sankore University or Timbuktu University, it's good to think to a level. The scholar of that time, we must see the level of them. I give just one example. Ahmed Baba, who deported to Morocco, when he went there, he took some scholar from Morocco, Fez, and the big scholars. And some Moroccans say, no, he's not black because he knows very well Arabic science. But when we took Ahmed Baba never left Timbuktu to learn anywhere in the world. Yes, today we have some students leave Mali to France, to USA, to other countries. And that time we have the same thing, but Ahmed Baba never left Timbuktu to learn it. But when you take his level, we have what we say the science methodology, the introduction, the comparison, and what we say tarjih. And he make the comparison, and he said, I think this is the truth. And the conclusion and the biography. This is which we found in the writing, not the building. So I think it's good to understand Timbuktu University and the level, not and place or area. This is just what is a entre parentheses. For Ahmed bin al-Qadi, really we don't know anything about him. I told you he wrote many manuscripts, but we found two, one in Morocco and the second in Tunisia. You know, in Mali, we don't have a copy of these manuscripts. Only one in Morocco and the second in Tunisia. And when he came back, what happened in Timbuktu or in Mali, we don't know anything about. So we have just the name, his father, and where he was born, and where he started to learn in Guinea, and where he came after to his stay in Timbuktu. So I think it is good to see my colleague Ismail Montana, who is Ghanaian, who worked in the Ahmed bin al-Qadi. Sorry? Okay. Okay, it's good. So this is what I don't know. I think Ismail Montana worked in the Ahmed bin al-Qadi. I think he can't give more information that which I said now. Thank you very much.
Would somebody like to deal with the slavery question or slave trade question?
I mean, I think that talking about slavery with Paul of Joy in the room is kind of unfair. But, definitely among the manuscripts of Timbuktu, and I think everybody can confirm that, there's plenty of documentation about slavery. From the famous fatwa from Ahmed Baba about about the fact that slavery is not cannot be racialized. So you cannot assume that if somebody is black is enslavable, but that slavery, the origin of slavery, is in unbelief. So there is this idea that slavery is not related to race, but is related to religious belief. And there is a lot of like documents of manumissions, and even, and I mean, Bruce also works on that, slaves as agents for commercial transactions. So there is plenty of materials on slavery. And in a way, even in the Fatash, the chronicle I'm working on, there is a substantial part of this manipulation that I didn't have time to talk about today, is this imposition of certain endogamous group of the status of slaves of the crown. So one of the claims, apart from being the Caliph of West Africa, was also that he was entitled to own as his personal belonging, not some people, some random people, but entire endogamous groups, people usually related to fishing activities, trade on the boats along the river Niger, etc., etc., etc. So there is a lot of materials to work on slavery, and I mean, there is things that are starting going on. I mean, Bruce is doing great work on slaves as agents, often, you know, for trade. But I don't think there is anybody who's actually digging for all these materials like on a broad sense. I don't know if Bruce can add something maybe to that.
Well, I mean, in Timbuktu there is a site where there, which is called, I forget what it's called, but there's a site in the center of town which is called the sort of slave market, which is identified with, at least orally and in people's memory, with slavery, and a place where slaves were sold. But in the manuscripts, at least the ones that I know, or the documents, to use a slightly more open term, what you see are sales of enslaved people in ones and twos, for the most part, in relatively small numbers. Especially in the 19th century, you see this, people being sent into the Saharan trade networks, but usually purchased in small numbers. So you see lots of evidence of that. Some of those people passed through Timbuktu, certainly. And of course we know that slavery played a large part in all of the different societies that exist along that whole sub-region, and that history of slavery became and remains to some extent important in local politics, in the nature of the colonial regime. in the nature of decolonization in that region. And even today, the traces of it are still felt in different social class position and ways that people think about each other and about themselves. So I think we should
yes,
stop
we have
there.
to break.